morning. But it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you for welcoming me to the Diocese of Manchester. I think this is my second or third time here. I've been here before, and so it's wonderful to be back. It's nice to be hosting or presenting on the last presentation of a series of presentations you've had all year. So this is the culmination of a long year of very hard work. From what I understand, I had dinner last night with Kelly and Derek, and they told me about the very hard work that you're all doing, preparing to move to the restored order, and that is not easy work. This is not an easy task that you're undertaking. And so the time that you're spending here is time well spent, and I'm honored to be a part of that. And I humbly pray and hope that I will contribute to that task that you're undertaking, which is a noble task and a very extremely worthwhile task. For all of the people in pastoral ministry in this diocese to be on the same page as you move forward. That's not an easy thing to do, to keep people on the same page. It can sometimes feel like herding cats, doesn't it? You know, to try to get everyone in pastoral ministry to think like-minded. But I thank Kelly for inviting me to spend this time with you, and I look forward to the opportunity. We're going to be doing lots of talking and sharing. This is not going to be a 6-hour lecture, that's for sure. We're going to spend lots of time at your tables talking and sharing and reporting back to the larger group, and I have a lot of input to share with you as well. So the day will go by very quickly, I assure you. Can we can we flip the slides over to my presentation, which is on there as well? We're going to get going here. We're going to be talking today about the domestic church, a phrase that maybe perhaps for many of us is fairly recent in terms of our vocabulary, not in terms of our experience. Many of us grew up in domestic churches. And we're going to talk about that. That was my experience. I certainly did grow up in a domestic church. Never called it that. It was just a Paprocki residence. And so, yes, there we go. Okay, so if we could just pop that one on to the slide presentation. And you can go ahead and see the description, thank you, Derek, of what it is that we're going to be focusing on today. I'm drawing my inspiration from Pope Francis, who used this phrase of calling parents back from exile in terms of the religious education of their own children. In many ways, parents have been exiled or have exiled themselves from the practice of participating in their children's religious formation. And so I think Pope Francis used a very apt metaphor. When we talk about being exiled, that means being forced from your own home and forced from your primary identity. And so he talks about in faith formation that we need to call parents back from this exile and restore them to their proper role. And so we're going to be talking about that today. What can we do to assist families and assist parents in particular in reassuming that proper role of forming their own children in faith. So I would like to just do a few things. I have to stay away from, there's a microphone. Sorry, I'm so sorry. That's my positioning, I think. It may not be the microphone, it might be a speaker. So I'm going to be careful about that. So I'd like to just do a few things by way of introduction this morning, both of myself and of our sponsor. And I'll start with our sponsor for today, which is Loyola Press. I have been with Loyola Press for 15 years. I just started my 16th year last month. It's very apropos for me because I went to a Jesuit high school in Chicago, St. Ignatius College Prep. I went to a Jesuit university as an undergrad, Loyola University. I went to the Institute for Pastoral Studies at Loyola University of Chicago for my master's degree. So that's 12 years of Jesuit brainwashing. that I survived. But I think it really did instill in me a great love for Ignatian spirituality, and I think you'll see that is a part of my vocabulary. So Loyola Press is a not-for-profit Jesuit ministry operated by the Society of Jesus, and we reside in Chicago. Chicago's been my home all my life, born and raised there. And any former Chicagoans here? Any transplants? No, one? Okay. What part of Chicago?
My dad's from Chicago, I was not.
Oh, okay, so you have roots in Chicago. And I was talking, I'm sorry?
Very firm Catholic roots.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I was talking with someone just before we started about, we have, as far as sports goes, a lot of kindred spirits here between the Cubs and the Red Sox. Remember how we waited such a long time? You guys only waited 80-something years. We waited 108. Come on, what were you crying about? So anyway, great fun to share those stories, great sports towns and so on. Back to Loyola Press. So we have numerous resources here today. I'm accompanied by Monica, who just stepped out because she knew I was going to mention her name. But Monica is here to take care of your needs. And she brought along many resources for you to look at, peruse, and to purchase, if you wish. And our goal is to have less for her to pack up at the end of the day. She does all the heavy lifting. I come traipsing in here and do my dog and pony show, and she's carrying boxes and doing all of that stuff. So God bless her for that. Loyola Press is also the publisher of many of my own books. And some of you were gracious enough to tell me before we started that you've used a number of my books, and I thank you for that. Thank you for helping to pay my children's college loans off and things like that. But I've been with Loyola Press for 16 years, and as I mentioned, and so it's a wonderful place for me to be and for me to in my job as national consultant for faith formation. I travel the country working with people like you, providing faith formation. And within the midst of that, we offer a little commercial. And so right before lunch, Monica will get up and do a little 15-minute commercial about Loyola Press so that we can pay the bills back at Loyola Press. Okay. So let me also just then give you a little bit of background on myself. Then I'm going to find out who's here today. And then I'm going to put you to work at your table for the first task of the day. I've been in ministry over 35 years. I started as a high school religion teacher. How many of you started as teachers? It's pretty common. A lot of people in ministry begin as teachers and then move into other pastoral ministry roles. So I taught high school religion for 9 years. That was my goal. When I was in high school, I decided I wanted to be a teacher and that I wanted to teach religion. I don't know how many times I've been asked when I say, oh, I taught religion. They say, oh, did you go to seminary? The conclusion is that I went to seminary, I failed, and I became a teacher. It's like, no, I set out to be a teacher. And so when I was an undergrad, I majored in theology, but then I double majored in history so that I would have a subject that I could pursue through the education program. And I went into the education program, got certified as a teacher in the state of Illinois, so I would know how to teach, but my goal was to teach religion. And so I did both of those, and I did my student teaching in history, but then I got hired to teach religion. I'm certified in the state of Illinois to teach social studies, grades 6 through 12. Never taught a day of it professionally in my life. It's all been for religion. So I did that for 9 years until the school that I was in was closed. And from there I went into parish ministry. And I became a parish pastoral associate and director of religious education. It was a small parish. It was me, the pastor, and the secretary as far as the staff went. And I wore, like many of you, and Monica included, I wore many hats.
Yeah.
I was the DRE, the pastoral associate. I was in charge of the RCIA. I was in charge of the youth ministry. I was, just what hat should I wear? I told Monica this morning, I said, instead of choosing which hat to wear, just stack them all up, You have to watch under these pillars. But, the whole idea being that, we have limited resources, and sometimes you are asked to just do so much. So I was in parish ministry then for 7 years, and until a new pastor came along, and he had kind of a different vision for where to take the parish, and it didn't include me. So I ended up working at the Archdiocese of Chicago in the catechetical office, and I became the consultant for catechist formation. So I went from taking care of 15 of my own catechists in the parish to taking care of 10,000 catechists in the Archdiocese of Chicago for their catechist formation. I did that for 5 years and then got the invitation to join Loyola Press. So that was exciting. It was the first time that I changed jobs of my own volition, which was kind of a nice thing to do instead of being shown the door. And I haven't looked back. And so it's been a wonderful life. And along the way, I wrote a few books, as I mentioned. Many of them are up here for sale as well. I'm married. My wife Joanne and I are married 36 years this November. We have 2 grown children, both who are married, and our oldest and his wife just had their first baby, and so we are now grandparents as well. So thank you. We're absolutely thrilled to have little Olivia in our midst, born in March. She's still our little peanut. So that's enough about me. Now, I said I wanted to get to know who's here, but we don't have time to go around and have everyone introduce themselves. But I do want to get an idea of what different roles we have. So first of all, how many pastors and clergy do we have here? Please raise your hands. Pastors and clergy, great representation this morning. Thank you for your ministry. How many of you are catechetical leaders? You're the director of a religious education program, faith formation, the majority of you. Thank you. How many of you are youth ministers? And you can raise your hand more than once, as I said before. Okay. How many of you coordinate, run the RCIA program? Again, many of the same hands. How many religious men or women do we have here this morning? Welcome to our religious as well. How many, do we have any Catholic school personnel here today? Catholic school teachers, principals? Okay, we do. Welcome. Okay. And other. What did I miss? What are some of the other ministries? Pastoral associates. Okay, wonderful. And anything else? What was that? Catechists. How many catechists do we have here today? Wonderful. And also, how many assistants do we have here today? The assistant to the DRE, secretaries, executive assistants, and so on. Raise your hand. Okay, wonderful. You're still assistants. They're like, oh, I'm just an assistant. You sometimes run the program for us. So thank you. That's very helpful to know. Oh, well, one other thing too then, I'd like to find out experience. How many of you are new at this? This has been your first year in your role. Okay, let's give them a hand, folks. Welcome to the club. This is a great group to be with. And I can't say enough about the power of networking, coming together with people like this. I'm coming off the experience of being at the NCCL conference, which we hosted in Chicago, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership. And I've been a member for over 20 years, and I haven't missed a meeting. It was nice to have it in my hometown this year. How many of you have been in ministry from 1 to 5 years? Raise your hand. And how many between like 5 and 10 years? How many have been like 10 to 15? And how many 15 to 20? And now we get to the fun part. And how many of you have been 20 or more? Yeah. Oh, don't clap yet. How many of you have been 30 or more? How many 40 or more? And do we have any folks 50 or more? How many years? 52. 52 years she's been in ministry. Been in ministry longer than many people in this room have been alive. Yeah. But that's a testament to especially those of you who are the newbies. You know, look around and see all those hands that went up 20, 30, 40, 50, 52 years. The record for me doing that little exercise, I had a woman who was in ministry for 60 years as a catechist. 60 years as a catechist. And at the time, well, even now, I said, you've been in this longer than I've been alive. She said, I know. And she stood up and took the microphone. She said, I have to say a few words. I'm like, I'll sit down. You know, I had to step aside for her. So thank you. Thank you for your dedication, the love that you bring to this ministry. We need to be reminded sometimes, don't we, that that's why we got into this. It's because our love of the Lord, our love of God's people, our love of children, if you're working in a children's program, our love for ministry. And so that's what's behind today. That's what's behind all these efforts. It gets hard. It gets difficult. There are times, and I'll ask this rhetorically, how many of you ever felt like walking away from this? You don't have to raise your hand. Some of you are going to raise it anyway. There are times, right? And yet, like Jeremiah had that experience, says, I will no longer speak his name, right? He just said, I've had it. I will no longer speak his name. But then he says, it's like a fire in my bones, and I can't keep it in. And that's how we are. You know, many of us have probably quit numerous times only to wake up the next day and say, I have to do this. God has called me to do this. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so we are going to be talking, I'm going to go back to my slide about calling parents out of exile. What I want to do is I want to put you to work at your table, very brief assignment. It's going to be 5 minutes. Just as a table, I want you to talk and brainstorm and come up with a list. One of you just record very informally. What are the biggest challenges that parents and families are facing today? Okay, talk as a table. What are the biggest challenges parents and families are facing today? 5 minutes. Thank you for getting right to work, rolling up your sleeves. That was a very short time, and I'm sure you feel like, oh, that's not enough time. But as a room, we're going to come up with a very good list. Now, a couple of things. One is Derek would like to collect your lists when we're done so that he has that compiled. Don't worry about your handwriting. He can read anything. And so he's asking that you just leave that list on the table there in the middle, and at some point he'll come around and collect them. Elise is going to be our assistant. She has the microphone on the side there. And what I'm going to ask is that every table just give us 2. Okay? Look at your list. Pick out 2. Because as an entire room, we're going to get a good long list. So listen closely so that you're not repeating something that you heard another table say, as much as possible. Okay? So Elise, if you would just begin, we'll start right over here. Find out who the spokesperson is. And hand them the microphone, and please share 2 challenges.
You want my list?
Yes. 2.
2 of them. The church institution has not remained relevant. It's out of touch with the family experience, and they overcommitted families.
Okay.
They're too busy.
Good. Okay. Good. Thank you. I know there's more on your list. Give it back to Elise.
There are 11.
Okay, yeah. Actually, hand your list to Elise, too. Elise, would you grab the list? That'll be a good way of collecting them all. And so on to the next table. So over there, someone raise your hand and just give us 2.
Challenges with priorities, how to prioritize what's important in their
Priorities.
families. And also lack of modeling and lack of traditions.
Okay. Yeah, lack of traditions. Very good. All right, she's going to work her way to the back. Okay, so the back table.
have a lack of confidence in how to teach the faith and a real relationship with Christ,
Okay.
and the loss of identity as children of God.
Yeah, okay, very good. These are very good lists. Thank you. Onward.
All right, so change in family dynamics with divorce and some of the things like that. That plays a major role. And another thing we spoke about was parents not properly cultivated, sort of like they're not properly formed themselves, so what's the form of children.
Good. Good. So changing family dynamics and parents themselves not being formed. Okay.
And we mentioned a lot of those, but we also said some families find some of the pressures of life, like caring for aging parents, is another stress that they're facing that affects what they can and can't do with their own children or choose to. And also physical and mental health of the kids themselves.
Okay.
It seems to be much different nowadays with a lot of kids suffering from anxiety, sometimes depression, and parents unsure how to deal with those issues.
Yeah. Good. That's a good point to make. Thank you. Okay. And this table up in front.
Hi, we also said social media, when the access kids have to the social media, whether it's supervised or unsupervised, whether the parents know what they're doing. And also, we talked about parents not being parents, wanting to be more friends with their children.
Absolutely. I had that conversation with my Uber driver yesterday. I got in some great conversations with them. We talked about that very thing, how parents are not called to be friends of their children, they're called to be parents. You become friends later on when they grow up. Okay, excellent. What else?
Okay, our table came up with economic pressures.
Economic.
The families are feeling that they have to provide for the kids to keep up with where everybody else in society says they should be and what they should be providing for their kids.
Yeah.
And as a result, they lose sight of the overall picture.
Great. Okay, good point.
And we also have that the church is no longer the center of life like it used to be.
Okay. Yeah, it used to be the center of everything, the whole social life and so on. Those economic pressures, thank you, that was a very good list. Those economic pressures are so real. You think about especially like college loans. When my two kids finished college and when they got married, they began their married life with probably $50,000 or more in debt, which, my wife and I began with no money, but we didn't have any debt. Now they're beginning with no money and debt. So those economic pressures are really something. Okay, next.
We had the issue with public schools, science and relativism, what they're teaching in the school. And also no family connection, disconnected families. And also lack of extended family.
Yeah, so disconnection in families, but that whole notion too of what they're learning in public school. And there are studies that have been done that show that children as young as 13 are making decisions to opt out of faith because science seems to make more sense to them. And so these are studies. This is not anecdotal. That children as young, actually the story that I read was as young as 10. And so, I had this experience a couple of years back. I was teaching sixth graders in a religious education class, and we were doing the creation story and Adam and Eve and so on. And we did a great job of delving into the story and the meaning of the stories and so on. And then I shocked them. I said, so is this what you're taught in your science class at public school? And they all looked at me like, no. And so I played sort of devil's advocate with them. I said, well, then which one of us is lying to you? And again, they were like, oh no, what do we say? And I said, okay, I'm sorry, that was a trick question. Fact is, neither of us are lying to you. Your science teacher is teaching you scientific truth, or the how. I'm teaching you religious truth, which is the why and the who. And they're not in conflict with each other. The Bible's not intended to teach scientific fact. We're not doing a good enough job of helping children to understand it. They think they need to decide. And so they're presented the creation story and so on in religion class, and the scientific, the Big Bang and evolution in science class, and they're left to decide for themselves. And one sounds like a fairy tale, and one sounds like it's science that they can grasp onto, and they're grasping that. And so you're right on target with that whole notion of what they're learning in public schools. It's not to say what they're learning is bad. We're not making a good job of helping them to synthesize it. Off my soapbox. On to the next table.
You said time was a major influence. It goes with priority, like the overcommitting at schools.
Oh, yeah.
With multiple children and other activities, so it becomes low. Also, that society's influence makes it difficult.
Society's influence. Yeah, so that and the time constraints. I have a younger brother who has 2 children that I never see. They never come to any family events because their time is so structured. Every time we have a family event of some kind, are you guys coming? Well, Ian has a soccer game and Aaron has a volleyball tournament, and I never see them. They never come to any family events. And so that's different from when I grew up. I was just always sitting around. It's like our family was going to go somewhere, get in the car. There was no schedule to check of any kind. Yes, next table.
So we said that it's not just that the public school is teaching, but the entire culture of public school.
Can you speak up a little bit, please?
Yeah. Nobody's ever talked about it. So it's not just what the public school is necessarily teaching, but the entire culture of the school.
Okay.
It breaks down what it is that they're coming to us for an hour, and it's kind of hard to actually help them with that. And we're finding that the family is breaking down, and because of the horrible drug epidemic that is happening, oftentimes grandparents are taking control of the children and having custody of them. And they are here with that blend of how faith formation used to be. So when you invite them into things, sometimes they can feel very uncomfortable and not really sure of how they're supposed to be helping these grandchildren with what they do.
Good. That's a good point. I mean, we see that all the time, right? Grandparents are the ones bringing the children, and then not knowing, well, is this my job or the parents' job? Okay, we got a big table back here.
Yes, it's such a smart room. You took most of our points.
I know it's hard to be last in an exercise like this.
Now we're in a scary place, so I'm just going to have to come up with something on the spot. But one thing we talked about a little bit was the velocity of social change. Right? Sometimes parents often find themselves almost living in a different culture from their children.
Oh, yeah.
And that makes communicating the message of faith very difficult.
Yeah, good point.
So,
okay, that's fantastic. That's well said. Yeah, it can almost seem like they're speaking a different language, and many times they really are. I mean, you look at, the language on social media, it's like, what do all these little acronyms mean? They say, watch your children's social media. You pick it up and look at it, you go, I don't know what any of this means.
OMG, LOL, BRB.
You have to translate for people, right?
Oh my goodness, I'm laughing out loud. I'll be right back.
Yeah, those are all abbreviations.
That's what they do.
Last but not least.
All right. So the first one we had, and I think it kind of goes along with what our previous table said, was there's a lack of zeal and fire for the Lord. Okay. Because even with zeal, you can cross those boundaries. We've all had our boundaries with our own children with, the culture shifts and stuff like that. But I think, you have that zeal for the Lord, you're going to bring that to your children. They don't have a choice when they're buckled in their seatbelts.
Yeah.
The other one I thought was, and being a teacher, a piano teacher, is that, and a parent, that we farm out our children to other people to teach them. we're not capable of teaching our own children, and that was even perceived in the kindergarten that I was in. They didn't not even want their parents to teach the children how to do their ABCs because they would do them incorrectly to what the school was teaching. So we have farmed all that out, so why teach faith?
Yeah.
We expect other people to take care of all that for us.
Yeah, excellent point. Very good point. That was great, folks. Thank you so much for the work you did at your tables. And I think you can see, we got all the tables, right? Thank you, Elise, for doing the legwork there and collecting those sheets as well. We have a choice then when it comes to this. Now, we can either be curmudgeons, you know what I mean? And say, look at what these parents are, blah, 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 and just sort of shake our fists at it and throw our hands up and say, it's not the way it used to be. You know, it's all changed. And I'm going to talk more about that because that's a temptation. You know, it's not the way it used to be. And it's like, right, it's not. I think we see that. So we can either be curmudgeons and sort of, you know, just shake our fists at this whole thing, or we can be advocates for parents and say, we're going to help you get through this. We're the place to come. We were talking last night, I had a wonderful dinner with Kelly and Derek. And we were talking about families, young families and so on. And we were saying how they need to hear from the church, someone saying, this is the hardest thing you will ever do in your life, is getting married and having children. It's wonderful, and everyone wants to do it, but it's the most profound, one of the most profound conversions that anyone will go through in their life. So I was telling them about, you know, seeing my son, who is now a dad these, you know, past 3 months, and he looks like he's aged 3 years. And you know, now little Olivia is starting to get through some of her crying fits and staying up all night, and she finally slept through a whole night. But you know, my wife and I continually tell both him and our daughter-in-law, this is hard, isn't it? And we say it with a smile while we're rocking her. We say, oh, but that's what, we're here for you. Call us anytime. We live 5 minutes away. We're so blessed. Call us anytime. She's having a crying fit. You've had a long day. You need to get out and just walk around the block. Call us. We need to think of ourselves, church, as grandparents to these folks. You know, what can we do? We're here to help. We're here to help you get through this most difficult challenge of your life, is raising a family in the 21st century. So that's the mindset that I would offer to this group here today as we continue to go through. How are we going to help these folks get through challenges that many of us couldn't even conceive of? You know, some of us in this room are a little older than others. We have some millennials here, and we have some Gen Xers, and we have a lot of baby boomers in the room. I'm a baby boomer. I was born in '59, and so my stories are coming from that experience. And one of the first things that I want to do to share with you is my experience, which I think is illustrative of the experience that many Catholics had 50 years ago. Not to be nostalgic, but to make a point of how things have changed. And I want to analyze, I'm going to offer you 6 things that I think have changed, and the reason I had you go first is now you've mentioned them all. So I will be presenting them as affirmation, you know, and showing that when I brainstormed this, I came up with the same stuff that you did. Maybe I can take it a little bit deeper. So having said that, find my clicker, as they say in Boston. I remember one time I was doing a presentation and getting ready, and the fellow in charge said, do you need a clicker? And I'm like, a what? You know, the clicker. That's all right. I have people make fun of me with my Chicago accent. You know. On our pizza, we have sausage. Haven't enough sausage. Sausage. All right, enough of that silliness. let's go ahead and move on. Let me take you down a trip down memory lane. So I was born on the south side, near south side of Chicago, southwest side of Chicago. Lived in an apartment building, family of 9 children, good Catholic family. 9 children. We lived above my dad's drugstore. And so there were 7 boys, 2 girls. And, and a part of our experience was Catholic life being at the center of just about everything that we did. So much so that we would play Mass at home. And so this is my brother Ed, who's playing Mass. Now this is pre-1965. He's doing the Tridentine Mass. As you can see, the altar is built into the wall. That was our big china closet that was part of this lovely apartment we had. And so my mom bought or put together all of the vessels and vestments that we needed. So there's those little vestments that my brother's wearing. She made those. And on the altar behind him, you see a stand with a missal on it. She made a missal for us to use. And then she went to the dime store and bought little goblets. We each had our own little chalice to use. We had a little sacristy with all of our chalices lined up in there. And oyster crackers were our choice. There were 2 schools of thought, oyster crackers or Necco wafers. Okay? See, so there are people here with the same experience, right? Some of the younger people here are thinking, Joe, you really grew up weird. You're surrounded by people who grew up weird. Okay, and we used to take turns, so there were 7 of us, so this is my brother John taking his turn. Couldn't find a picture of me saying Mass. At that point, I was the youngest. This was before my younger brother and sister were born, and so I could never get my turn. They kept forcing me to be the altar boy. Now, on one occasion, someone had the wisdom to turn the camera around and to show that we actually had a congregation. Okay? So this wasn't just, although we did this, I'm going to go play Mass. We would, and so you looked, there was about 10 of us there, and there's me. Thank you. I used to be cute. What is fascinating about this picture, and the reason I show this to you is, again, not just to be nostalgic, but to make some important points. Not everyone in this picture is from my family. So I had a big family, but this young lady next to me is a friend. This young boy behind me is another friend from across the alley. That's my brother Ron. This is a girl from down the street. This is a boy who lived across the street. This is my brother John. This is my sister Ramona, who was not a nun. Never was, since she couldn't be the priest. Mom made an outfit for her so that she could be the nun. So she was never left out. My favorite part is right on the edge here. This is my brother Ed. He's taking up a collection. So we Paprocki's, we're not dumb. You know? The point that I want to make about this is that, and picture this, one of us ran out into the street. So this is inner city, Chicago, south side of Chicago. One of us ran out into the street and yelled, "Yo, anybody want to come over and play Mass?" And 4 or 5 kids were like, "All right. Bring your change, there's a second collection." Which they gladly did. But the point being, picture that. A kid running out into the street, just saying, "Who wants to play Mass?" And a bunch of other kids saying, "Yeah, that sounds like a cool thing to do." And coming on over and playing Mass, not thinking twice about it. I don't think that happens anymore. This is a different time. It's a different world, a completely different world. Up until recently, though, we have been relying on the same delivery method for transmitting the faith as we used during this era. And it's a completely different world. And so that's why we need to be looking at new paradigms, new approaches. You know, so if you're looking at why are we doing this restored order and so on, it's because we're living in a different time, and we have to be looking at a different way of approaching our families, and it's all tied up together. This is not just about restored order, it's about lifelong faith formation. How do we, as a diocese, approach this notion of lifelong faith formation, which means, not only restored order, but, perhaps family catechesis models and other models that are going to walk with families and children through their entire life, through baptismal preparation, marriage preparation, baptismal preparation, early childhood, middle childhood, adolescence, and so on. The whole ball of wax we're taking a look at. So think big picture. Tweak there. It's to say we need to adapt to a new world order that has to match the experience that these parents and the challenges that you identified are facing. So let me share with you then 6 principles or 6 examples of what has changed and why we can no longer do things the way we once did. And so I refer to these as when we look back at the time in which I grew up, and many of you, first of all, before I go any further, how many of you had an experience similar to mine growing up? Kind of a Catholic bubble, Okay, a lot of us in this room. That's significant to know. We're coming with a mindset. And very often it's like, well, that's how it worked for me. Why shouldn't it work that way for everyone else? In my work at Loyola Press, I do a lot of work with our textbooks and so on, coming up with ideas for teachers to engage students creatively. And I was once working for several years with a very good friend of mine who unfortunately passed away. And he was a brainiac. He was incredibly intelligent. I mean, he had encyclopedic knowledge of the Catholic faith. He could recall quotes from papal documents and so on. Anyway, whenever he would put together a lesson for the teacher, it simply said, read and discuss, read and discuss, read and discuss. There was never anything that was, got the kids more engaged. And I'm like, Tom, you've got to do more to get the kids engaged. And he said, why? That's how I learned. And I kept saying, Tom, you're not normal. What I meant by that was, not everyone learns that way. And we know today about multiple intelligences, and some people learn through reading, yes, but others learn through hearing and listening. Others learn by doing. Others learn through music, and others learn visually. It's very complex. We can't just do it all one way. And so the fact that many of us grew up in what I refer to as a Catholic bubble. I thought the whole world was Catholic when I was growing up on the south side of Chicago. And it took me a long time to realize that Chicago happens to be a very Catholic city, and that the majority of the country is Protestant. And so we lived in these little Catholic bubbles. When the immigrants came here, we all huddled together with people who were like us to get through and to adapt to this new world that we lived in. And so the experience, well, I'm not going to get ahead of myself. Let's start going through these 6. I call this an ecology of institutions that once supported faith formation that have now evaporated or crumbled, whatever word you want to use. Insert dramatic word there. This ecology that once of institutions that once supported faith formation is no longer there. The first one being the shared traditions and values of a homogeneous and insular community. Again, not only did I think that everyone in the world was Catholic because of where I grew up, I thought everyone was a White Sox fan because it was the south side of Chicago. I thought everyone in the world was a Democrat because the south side of Chicago and Chicago in general is, the Democratic machine, Mayor Daley, and all of that. We all thought the same way. Everyone in that neighborhood had the same traditions, values, and so on. It was a homogeneous group of people, and it was an insular community. That's gone. Today, our communities are no longer homogeneous. We live in communities that have great variety, great pluralism, and even within our own families, right? Many of us have people who married into our families who are not Catholic, who are not of the same ethnic origin that we are. I remember when my oldest sister, so the oldest one in the family, started dating an Italian boy. And we're a Polish family. And there was a bit of a, but he's Catholic. And I'm sure that's what made my parents relax. He's Catholic. He's a good boy. He's a policeman. Okay? And so there were shared values. But it was stretching, for a Polish girl to marry an Italian. And now in my family we have Asians in our family, and we have non-Catholics in our family, and so on. That was unheard of when I was growing up. So this shared tradition. So what do I mean by that? Everyone in the neighborhood knew what day May crowning was on, because it was the center of family life and social life. And so it was a shared tradition. In other words, everyone was on the same page. And you didn't have to do a whole lot of work promoting anything. You just, this is when it happens. May crowning takes place on this date in May, and we all know what to do. Shared values. So everyone believing and practicing the same values. That has changed. Again, we have people in our own families who don't have the same values. And that makes Christmas or Thanksgiving very difficult for many of us in our families, especially in the political arena that we're in today. I know many people that I work with, especially some of the younger people, who say that it's absolutely horrific for them to go home for Christmas because their parents think one way and they think another way about the political reality we live in. And so this idea of everyone being, and now I may be exaggerating to some extent when I say everybody being on the same page, but it was certainly a majority of people. And if you were in the minority, you kept quiet. Okay, you didn't let that out.
You didn't run around and tell everybody I'm offended.
Say it again?
You didn't run around telling everybody I'm offended.
Yeah, you didn't. You didn't tell people you had a different opinion and so on. Thoughts about this? Anyone else want to share their insight, their take on this before we move on? Yes, sir.
It might not have been as great as we remember.
Oh yeah, I'm not going to say that it was great, but it made faith formation something that was easier for us to do than today. Okay, thank you for that. That's why I like to keep coming back to the idea of not being nostalgic. That it's not like everything was hunky-dory back then. A lot of things were simply hidden. that today come out. What do you want to expound on your thought?
Only that to pine about nostalgia is really a waste of time.
It is. I agree 100% with you. That's going to be, and I thank you for bringing that up, because I want to make sure you understand that my thrust is not going to be, let's go back to those days. They're gone. They're not coming back. What are we going to do about it? Thank you for helping me put that bluntly. Yes?
Because the security, perhaps, that we once felt is no longer there in our homes and in our communities, where it was safe to be Catholic, out loud and proud. We're now forced into a situation where we can no longer circle the wagons, and we have to actually evangelize.
Yes.
For that, we have to be on fire, and we need to have a relationship with our Lord.
Right. We have to be intentional, you know, and so the book by Sherry Waddell, not by Loyola Press, don't ask for this book, Sherry Waddell's book, Forming Intentional Disciples. We did not have to be intentional about every little thing, because it was the way everyone did things. It's almost like, I like to say, it's almost like we grew up Catholic, like we were marinated in Catholicism. We were just dipped into this Catholic juice, and a lot of it just seeped into us. Whereas today, we have to be intentional. How is this going to happen? It's not just gonna happen the way it did, the way the whole community would step out on the day for May crowning, because that's what you did. So yes, the intentionality is absolutely key. Yes?
And I think that, you know, reflecting on the culture of the time, I think that we can learn from that culture too. You know, I'm an Italian family. We let one of the Polish people in.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
That was difficult, and he was a Pole, so he's a pillar in our family.
Yeah.
But I think that we can learn from that kind of culture and how the culture's changed today. Because if we want to work to bring people closer to Jesus Christ and love Jesus Christ, then we're talking about a culture very similar to that culture, where those that believe and love Christ gather together to continue to have that culture grow, that type of culture. So it is taking from what we've had as an institution and learning from it and how we move forward proactively.
Yeah, you never throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Absolutely.
You know, we have to look back at this and say, okay, let's not, look at this through rose-colored glasses, but are there also other elements that we can draw from to bring in that can inspire the work that we need to do today in the very complex situation we face? Okay? All right, let's move on. Thank you for the great give and take. Next one. One of the institutions that supported faith formation was, in and of itself, the family. And so families themselves had traditions and devotions and different acts of piety. How many of you recall in your upbringing praying the rosary together as a family? Okay, quite a few of you. How many of you had some other kind of pious traditions, devotions of some kind that you practiced as a family? Okay, this was something, I mean, you look at what my mom did to create that little Catholic church for us inside our own home. That was obviously intentional. She was a convert, actually. She became Catholic at the age of 13. Her own choice. She grew up in dire poverty, one of 5 children, and the first 2 were baptized, but her parents were so, what's the word, dysfunctional, that the rest of the kids were just not baptized because they couldn't be bothered. Her father was an extreme alcoholic. Her mother had extreme depression. She didn't leave the house for 20 years. So my mom grew up with her older sister as kind of her mom, and started hanging around with a friend who was Catholic, because the whole neighborhood was Catholic, and was like, I think I want that in my life. So she went to the priest and asked, can I become Catholic? And he said, well, we have to get, one of your parents to approve. And so my mom said she went with her dad, and she sat in the foyer, and her dad went in and spoke with the pastor, and about a half hour later, the door opened, and her dad came out with red, wet eyes, and the pastor had read him the riot act. How dare you not raise your child, as a Catholic, when that's your job, that's your responsibility. My mom said she never had seen her father cry, ever, until the pastor made him feel, small for doing that. Anyway, long story short, she became Catholic and, raised this very Catholic family. So she made sure that we practiced the devotions, the traditions, the piety that were part of the fabric of that time. Now, what happens, and I started to see glimpses of this as I was growing up, but not so much until the next generation. What happens when the kids have such structure in their schedule? When do you do the family rosary? When so-and-so has soccer on this night, and the other one has tennis on that night, or dance recital, and the other one has this, and we're pulled in so many different directions. It's like, okay, well, we'll skip that for this week, the rosary, we'll skip that. Little by little, these things just fell to the wayside because there wasn't that time that was just naturally built in for that. And so many of the family devotions and piety simply fell off the radar. Today, many of our kids come home and are alone until, they're latchkey kids. We talk about they come home, they have their own key, and they wait until one of the parents comes home. And so they're spending time alone and on the social media and watching TV and making, what do you call those, the microwave dinners and snacks and so on. So again, not to say it used to be good, now it's bad. It used to be different, and now we're facing many complexities. My two kids don't have a choice about whether one of them can stay home and not work. They have to work. They're both working full time, and even then, they once had to come and ask us for a little economic bailout. And I remember telling my son, he said, I'm sorry to ask, we just got some bills and so on, and I feel bad asking. I said, first of all, you're both working full time. You're not freeloaders. I said, if you're a freeloader, that'd be a different story. I said, you're not spending wildly, you're just going through life, and this is what happens. I said, so here, take the check. I said, because the alternative is you guys moving in with us, and that's not going to happen. But my wife was able to stay home for a few years. Okay, my kids can't make that choice anymore. That's not an option for them, economically speaking. I think it was this table talked about economic. I think you did. Any other thoughts about this change that families have experienced? Any insights about that? Yes?
Well, I stepped out, so I hope that wasn't said when I was out, but I think perhaps part of this plays into how when the church, people say that the church doesn't feel relevant.
Yeah.
I think to many people those devotions have begun to feel less relevant than they did. So in the next generation, for some reason, if you pray the rosary every night with your family growing up, and you're not doing it within your family, you haven't appropriated it as your own faith. It was done because, and that doesn't feel relevant to you anymore. And I think this is something we're seeing more and more with parents, is that the relevance of the older traditions just don't translate.
That's very true, and I think that challenges us to come up with new incentives for doing traditional things. When I was a kid, you prayed the rosary for the conversion of Russia. That was one of the major reasons you prayed the rosary. That no longer is as relevant as it once was. But what are the reasons today for us to pray the rosary? Bishop Barron lands on, I think, a very good example of how to adapt to the present age. He talks about how we're so scattered and pulled in a million different directions. And he says we all suffer from what's called monkey brain. Have you heard this phrase? Monkey brain, that monkeys swing from limb to limb. He said that's what our brains are constantly doing. And he said the rosary is an opportunity to tame the monkey brain. That's a different incentive than praying for the conversion of Russia. But it speaks to today's generation, which feels so pulled in so many different directions, and they're turning to things like yoga and other meditations and so on to find calm and find peace when we have that. We have that. So I think we need to repackage a number of things and tell them that this can assist them in their challenge. I saw this hand, and then we'll work our way back.
I think what somebody brought up before is coming to my mind with these things, like the first one that you said, the Catholic bubble has burst. But the good thing that was there that we can try to maintain is that we felt a sense of belonging when we had big families, when we had ethnic churches and things like that. And to recreate that, I think people still long to belong.
Yes.
And that's why there's so many activities that their kids are doing.
Yes.
So, I mean, to present, the Holy Spirit's the only one who can convert their hearts. But we can certainly present a belonging community.
Yes.
And in the second thing, the family traditions, we have a very successful and growing family home study because there's an opportunity for those families to be together and to create traditions. I love the rosary, but I realize, this is only my first year in ministry, that I can't push that on these people just for the sake of getting them to say the rosary. I think to push traditions of let's come together in like an XLT every year. And their hearts are open to these things and they may be new to them, but let's create those new traditions for them.
We have so much pre-evangelization to do. We have to let people know that they are welcome, that they belong. That what you said about belonging is very true. Many of our young families are involved in so many of these sports and so on because that's where they have a sense of belonging. They make friends there. They spend, the parents, they bring their lawn chairs and they sit and they watch their kids play and they talk with the other parents, and that's where they're experiencing belonging and community. So it's not just, a rabid love of sports. It's a sense of belonging. And so, when we look at our own offerings in the parish, how are we offering a sense of welcome and belonging for people who are sometimes petrified at the idea of walking through our doors? What are they going to experience? Are they going to be scolded for being bad parents? Are they going to be embarrassed because they don't know the right vocabulary? And so on. What are we doing to first make them feel at home and welcome and that they belong? You wanted to respond.
Yeah, I want to build on that. I think one of the other advantages of things like the family-based home programs is that the families do come together. When I was growing up, extended family was all around, and we supported each other, and families don't have that now. So to pull them together and to help them build communities with each other, to support both in faith and on the journey.
Good, well said. Let's work our way to the back here.
I was going to say, one of the things that has informed my, looking at the faith journey is our marriage, the work with marriage prep. I was always surprised me, and I heard this many different times, and maybe some of you have too.
well, we're going to get married, and we're going to let the kids choose which religion that they want, because one is, we had our own family. I mean, my niece married a wonderful girl, married a practicing Jewish guy, okay? And they're just darling, and they have this cute little baby, and they're going to let him choose what he wants. And I've heard that outside our family many times. I don't know if anybody else had that experience, but I hear that
definitely. We hear there's a lot of that today, and
I'm saying it's all bad. I'm saying that's something to be aware of. What we're doing now.
I understand the notion of saying let the children choose, but what that often results in is us not telling them anything about our faith. We're going to wait until someone gets their ear, just let them choose. My friend Tom McGrath at Loyola Press has a wonderful response to that. He says, if that child has a grandma or grandpa or an aunt that lives on the other side of the country, and they never get to see that aunt, it's incumbent, or that grandparent or whatever, it's incumbent upon the parents to tell the child about grandma, and what a wonderful lady she is, and what she did for me, and how much she loves you even though she's not here right now. He says, just because they're not going to see them doesn't mean you don't talk about them. That you have to make that person present, and today we can do that through FaceTime and so on. But too often when parents say, I'm going to let the children decide, the parents are basically saying, we're not going to say anything to them. Let's move to the back here. So 2 people at that table. Whoever wants to go first. Sister?
Well, Pope Benedict addressed that same question. He said you wouldn't say to your baby, we'll wait and see what kind of food you want to eat.
Yeah, you know what is good for them, and you offer that to them because you know it's life-saving. Good, yes?
One of the things we're seeing at our parish, we started a Catechesis of the Good Shepherd program.
Wonderful.
Are you familiar with that?
Yes. Wonderful program.
We started it 2 years ago, and what's really interesting is the way that it's bridging the gap for us.
Good.
Not only with the restoration of the sacraments, but for parents to be able to sit in the room. Like, they don't believe that kids will take off their shoes, treat a place like sacred space, and be silent for 2 hours.
Yeah.
They say, no way, that's not happening. Then when they come in and they actually see it, they're realizing how much they crave the less chaos, like their kids do. This can be like the sanest space these kids are in all day long.
Absolutely.
For 2 hours they come in and they're alone with our Lord, meditating on some piece of scripture, some aspect of the liturgy that they just learned about through a presentation. And it's just beautiful. It's like this, but it's like it's reintroducing that kind of aspect.
Absolutely. What Catechesis of the Good Shepherd does, and I know at Loyola Press and our Finding God program, which is imbued with Ignatian spirituality, is inviting children and families into an encounter with mystery. And that's something that is missing. This is something that we have gotten so good at developing our faith formation programs into classes, courses, where information is more important than transformation. And information is important. We need good Catholic vocabulary. But what Catechesis of the Good Shepherd does, and again, as I mentioned, our Finding God program from Loyola Press, is it invites young people and their families into an experience of mystery. Now, so what do I mean by this? It means that it has a sense of liturgy to it. See, as Catholics in liturgy, we use a different language. I call it a language of mystery. And it invites us to encounter mystery. So it's a language of sign and symbol and ritual. And that's something the world doesn't offer to them. Now, if you're wondering what this language of mystery is, we're going to do a simple demonstration right now, and this is going to be interactive. We used the language of mystery at Mass. So you all know the language of mystery. You don't have to learn a new language. But let's do a review right now. I want you to start thinking of what are some things we do at Mass whether you're the priest or in the congregation. What are some things we do at Mass where we use our hands, our arms, our body to express ourselves without using words? When you think of an example, raise your hand. I will point to you, and I'm going to ask you to stand up and demonstrate. So it's going to be a little show and tell. So no more talking. I'm going to do the first one, and then I'll ask you to raise your hands. This is a very talkative group. We just had a wonderful conversation using a language of mystery. It's something that Catechesis for the Good Shepherd incorporates. That's something that I highly encourage, and in particular my book, Beyond the Catechist Toolbox. So this little book here talks about how to incorporate. See, for some reason when we leave church and go to catechesis, it's like we forget that language. It all turns into words. And words alone do not capture the mystery of God. So getting back to this, devotions and piety, those are ways of encountering mystery. And it's a unique Catholic language. How many of you in this room understood that entire conversation we just had? All right? We all do. Now, if any people who work on staff here that walked by and are not Catholic, they'd look at it and say, what are these people doing in there? They're making these hand gestures, must be gang signs or something. You know, what's going on? But it's a powerful language. So this is not just, it's cute or it's cool. How did Moses encounter God? Through a burning bush, a sign, a symbol. What did God ask Moses to do? Take off your shoes, a sign, a symbol, a ritual gesture. That when you encounter mystery, words alone are not enough. For me, the most profound example of this is when my dad passed away 20 years ago this year. And he had Alzheimer's. You know, Alzheimer's not only robs you of your memory, but it robs you of your vocabulary. So as Dad got closer and closer to death, he spoke very little. He was just this little puppy who sort of followed my mom around wherever she went. And so when he was in the hospital and the doctor said, you know, I think you may want to start saying your goodbyes. It looks like his organs are failing and so on. We started coming in to say goodbyes. So my wife and I brought our two children, Mike and Amy, who at the time were about 10 years old and 7 years old. And Dad was conscious but unresponsive. You know, so when Mom said, John, Joey and Joanne and the kids are here. There was no, hi or even acknowledgement with his eyes, but he was conscious. But we thought, okay, so we just sat and talked with my mom. And then a priest friend came and dropped in and chatted with us as well. And then before he left, he says, can I lead a prayer? And we said, thank you, Father. We gathered around my dad's bed, and he was at the foot of the bed. And he said, let's pray in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And what did my dad do? Herky-jerky, he made this motion, and we all looked at each other. Our jaws just dropped. We were like, we thought he wasn't here. And he was unresponsive, but he recognized a language that he was taught 75 years before. And he recognized the presence of God. Alzheimer's had not stolen that from him. And so this is profound stuff that we're talking about. And how do we imbue in our families a sense of mystery in a world that thinks everything can be solved by science? We have to help them understand that even in our own lives, science doesn't explain our love for each other. A friend of mine recently said that he was talking with an atheist friend who was getting up there in years and had said that he was resigned to never falling in love. It's just not going to happen. Well, lo and behold, he fell in love. He met this woman and they fell in love. And my friend said, oh, what a miracle God has given you. And his atheist friend said, come on, we're not going to get into that God stuff. God has nothing to do with this. And my friend said, oh, you're right. It's all just a chemical reaction. And his atheist friend said, no, but let's just leave it at that. He was sort of shaken by, he had to stop and think about this. Is this love that he's encountered now scientifically explainable? So I hope I'm not getting on a tangent, but I think this all comes down to, the fact that we need to be inviting our families into an encounter with the presence of God, which is with us, is with them. We need to give them the language and the tools with which they can and recognize. That's why St. Ignatius used that phrase, finding God in all things. He means recognizing. Not that you have to go and find God because he's hiding, but recognizing God because you put on the right eyeglasses. We need to teach people how to see. And that's a wonderful thing we can do for people. One last comment, then we're going to move on.
I just want to suggest a devotion that is not as well known, and that is the devotion to enthroning the home to the Sacred Heart of Jesus.
Yes.
So if you go online and the family enthrones the home together, there's a 3-day preparation of prayer, very simple prayer. But we have it in our parish at Holy Rosary, and it really brings Christ in an image. The priest has a special blessing for the image right into the center of the home.
Yeah, images are so important because images go beyond words. Again, as a Catholic tradition, we use images and pictures and so on. That's why Loyola Press, we have this wonderful art easel that uses images to teach children. Art, that can, and on the back are instructions for the teacher how to bring this to life, and so on. We use the phrase, if these walls could talk. Have you heard that? Catholics, our walls talk. We put statues and pictures and images and stained glass windows because images talk about the mystery of God. And it's the image of the Sacred Heart and so on. Those are all images that speak to us, more powerful than words. So, thank you. That was excellent. We're going to, let's do this. Let's take a short break right now. When I'm all done going through these 6, I think I'll just go back and ask you, and I think I'll give that to you as a table talk as well. Now, what are some strategies that we can come up with now to counteract these challenges that I've put out there? And then the last part of our day, I'm going to share with you what Loyola Press has by way of a family catechesis program, so that you can go away today with some information about one option for you to look at. Also, right before lunch, Monica is going to do a little 15-minute overview of what she has, what she brought, and what's available. So let's move on now to the third example of something that has changed since that time that I ran out into the streets and said, who wants to come over and play Mass? That was a time of unquestioned church authority. And not only church authority, but unquestioned authority. People back in the day simply did not question institutions and authority the way we do today. Okay? Today, just about any institution, people are suspicious of. People are suspicious of our government. People are suspicious of the church. People are suspicious of just about any institution that you can name. What has exacerbated that for the Catholic Church, of course, is the very painful abuse crisis that we've gone through. That was an undermining and a breach, a heinous breach of trust. And so today, people do not hesitate to question authority, especially the authority of the Catholic Church. Many people have simply concluded that the Church has forfeited its authority because of the sex abuse crisis, which is why many people simply will not even listen, because they say, sorry, you had your chance, you blew it, you forfeited, you have no voice anymore. So this is very difficult for us to overcome and for us to deal with, which again, I think very naturally leads back to the reality that one of the first things that you and I have to do, whether you're a priest, religious, or layperson, is establish trust. It's absolutely huge. Many of you are going to be the face of the church. We have a nice representation of clergy here today, but because of the lack of numbers across the board in terms of clergy to staff our parishes, not just here, but all over the country, lay people are very often the face of the church other than Sunday Mass. And as we know, and we chatted with this, I chatted with, where's Kathleen? She came up to talk to me. She's right here. Many of our folks don't go to church. And so sometimes the only person who is the face of the church is the director of religious education, the pastoral associate. You're their first, the entree into the church. And so this whole idea of building trust is absolutely important. I want to go back to something else Kathleen was bringing up during the break about this language of mystery we talked about happens at Mass, but most of our people don't go, and that's a big problem we have. One of the things that I'm proposing to you is that we have to use that language at the other gatherings that they do come to, so that it becomes an invitation for them to experience this at Mass. So, when I teach a class of kids, 6th graders, 8th graders, whatever, I do a number of things in class, like, if a child's going to read, they go up to the Bible, and I teach them to bow in front of the Bible. I stand at the door with a bowl of holy water. As they come in, they bless themselves with holy water. I have them all stand, and we pray that today God's Word that we're going to learn about will be... So what did we just say? God's Word will be... So we use that language throughout our class. We need to do more of that. When I present at parent meetings, First Communion meetings, and so on, I always begin by having half a dozen or so parents involved in a a procession where they carry items forward and they place them on a prayer table. And it's spontaneous. These people, I don't have them come for practice ahead of time. Right before we start, I'll take these items, say, here, will you bring this Bible up when I ask you to? And here, you bring this candle, you bring this cloth. And then we start music, and then I'll just say, and the people come up and they put these things down. It's like we begin with mystery. We have a procession and so on. What I found interesting then was when we did take our kids, these sixth graders, to Mass at the end of the class year. They were recognizing things that we did in class and thinking that the Mass was borrowing them from me. So during all year, one of the things we did when we start class was I would say, this is the day the Lord has made. So I taught them that give and take response. We did that every class, the whole year. We went for that Mass. What did the musician choose to sing for the psalm response? It's the Easter season. This is the day the Lord has made. And so the song begins, and I'm like, thank you, Jesus. And I'm sort of sitting there like this, and I sense all this commotion in the pew, and I look at my students, and they're all trying to get my attention, like, she's playing your song, like she borrowed it from me. So the long and short is that we need to prepare people to go to Mass. So when we do these things and we can catechize about them, then they go to Mass and they experience them, they'll feel at home, more at home. So anyway, back to this notion though about unquestioned church authority. So this makes it very difficult for us to present teachings that we claim as truth, the revealed truth of God as entrusted to the Catholic Church and being passed on from generation to generation because we live in an age of relativism, of people are going to say, well, that's your truth, and it's coming from a tainted institution, so why should I listen to you? And so this is something that we're dealing with today that was not present back in the day. And so this is another one of the challenges that we face. And I hope I'm not depressing all of you. You know these things. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to identify them a little more scientifically, so to speak, so that you can come away, instead of just feeling like there's this nebulous cloud of challenges, that you can come away with some, okay, there's some identifiable issues. What can we do about those? So if this is an issue that reminds us, what am I doing to establish trust in my program? When people come, are they getting a sense of belonging, of welcoming? That's the first step to developing trust. Do they see us as authentic? Today, that's really what it comes down to. People need to know that you're authentic. Authenticity is huge for our younger generation. They can sniff a phony a mile away. They won't fall for anything. So your thoughts about this, either more insights about what we're facing or more strategies about how we deal with it. What else comes to mind for you? Yes.
I have a couple of thoughts regarding this. One is when I look at or experience or interact with people in their 80s or 90s, there is that still unquestioning church authority. It's very hard to, they want to see Father. They want to hear what Father had to say.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But when I'm ministering with younger adults, middle-aged even, they don't have a problem taking direction or information or leadership from a layperson.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So that's one piece of
Good.
it. Another piece of it is, while institutionally they may question because of all the scandal and all, but I think that's a cop-out. But anyway, the older people, they don't question the doctor. Well, if the doctor wanted me to know this,
Oh,
he
right.
would tell me,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or they don't question even these crazy scam people on the telephone. They get
Yeah.
caught up by
Yeah.
them because they see them as
They look or sound
the kind of
official.
letter they send you or the kind of voice they
Yeah.
have in the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So they still maintain that
Yeah.
little,
Mm-hmm.
authoritative power in their lives.
Yeah, but not so for the younger
But
generation.
not for the younger, but at the same time, I find that younger people and middle-aged people readily accept
Mm-hmm.
from professionals like us, once we've kind of towed the walk a little bit,
Yeah.
a leadership role. And so there's a plus that comes from that.
Yeah.
It's
Mm-hmm.
not that all of the young people or middle-aged people are, anti-church authority.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they need to see folks looking a little bit more like them to be drawn in easier.
Yeah.
There's a lot that can happen when a man and a caller comes into a situation. But for some people, it brings out negative.
Yeah, it's a very complex
So
situation.
I think if we work in tandem,
Yeah. Yeah.
lay and
Mhm.
ordained, we can bring the best of both.
Absolutely. That's always the answer. How are we going to teamwork together? And, I think you made a really good point that for many people, they're going to look at you with a very similar respect that they would give to the clergy because you're the church person. A lot of times, I remember being called the church guy. I bumped into a family from my parish at the supermarket, and I heard the kids say, "Mom, that's the church guy." And they all stood a little taller, and hello, how are you? They acted a little nicer. Kind of the same way I'm sure our clergy are accustomed to that type of thing. And many of you experience that now as well. You're the church lady, you're the church guy. And so, it's our job now to together with our clergy, to accept that role and to live up to it, to make sure that we're authentic, make sure we're prepared, that we're formed, fully formed, lifelong learning for all of us. Before we ask that of other people, what are we doing to continually form ourselves in our faith? Because people want to know, can they trust us? And so I think that's absolutely crucial. I saw another hand here, yes.
We may not be seeing people every week, but we do see them at touchstone moments in their life. And I think that's where we have to be very intentional to be welcoming and to gain their trust at funerals, baptisms, when the extended family comes for First Communion, because there's someone. Those moments gather the people who have kind of scattered, and I think those are real opportunities to be
definitely
very welcoming and this is your home. This is where you're going.
Absolutely. Well said. It reminded me of a story I shared last night with Derek and Kelly. A priest friend of mine was telling me about his experience of leading marriage prep for many years. And he said he always began with the way he was taught to begin, by asking them, so tell me why you want to be married in the church. And he said he realized after a while that what that did was it put them on the defensive, that they needed to now give an answer that they thought Father wanted to hear. And he said it immediately created what he realized was a sense of not welcoming, but putting them on the spot. Why do you want to be married in the church? Not that he asked it that way, but even if you ask it nicely, it's putting them on the spot to, give the right answer. He said now he begins his marriage prep with, tell me how you fell in love. Completely different dynamic. The people now are, who doesn't want to tell that story? What couple doesn't want to share their story? Now they're feeling like, oh, I'm at home here, I'm being welcomed, my story is being validated. Eventually they'll get to those. So let's talk about why being married in the church is an important thing. But do you see that slight nuance there? in terms of, how do we help establish trust with people is very often validating their experience, where they're coming from, and saying, tell me about your experience. Tell me where you're coming from. Tell me what's going on. And then inviting them to make that connection with their story and the story. What else? Yes, back here, and then I'll come back up here.
One of the things that occurred to me, I kind of fell into by accident. When I was going for my master's in theology, I was literally living across the street from Cardinal Law's place during the height of the protesting.
Okay.
And I remember feeling just so frustrated with the whole situation, feeling like I'm just going in and I'm so excited to do what I'm going to do, and this is happening. How do we recover from this?
Yeah.
And I remember asking my pastor about it, and he said, this whole thing is going to turn everything around. Now it needs to come from the lay people. We have to reclaim our moral authority through the lay people.
Interesting.
And so it has to be holiness all the way. So like you're saying, authenticity. But one of the things that's occurred to me as time has gone on is that not only is it our personal holiness, but we need to actually catch our clergy, our religious doing amazing holy things.
Right.
And thank them and lift them up.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise we're not doing our job as a church.
Yeah.
Because people need to see that there's these amazing people that just when the building was emptying and the fire is burning, there were other people rushing into the seminary to see what they could do about it. And those are the real heroes.
Wonderful. Well said. Very good. I saw a hand up here. Yes.
Yeah, I want to add to that the challenge that this presents as a layperson, I can only take someone so far. I can only encourage them so much to go to reconciliation. I can't offer the sacrament of reconciliation.
Right.
And what ends up happening is, as a layperson, we need the clergy to be involved in that. And sometimes they're a little hesitant, especially with children. And, we have all these protections in place, which sometimes can make our life crazy. If we're just trying to get a volunteer for something, which is, it's okay, it's understandable. But I think for the clergy, the saddest piece for me is that the very holy men that have decided to devote their lives, even to this day, are just so persecuted.
Oh, yeah.
As you mentioned, very well said, they're still running into the fire.
Yeah.
They're still choosing today, even after all this, to serve. And yet there's that reluctancy. Even people who are in our church still are very skeptical.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm going to send my child to that conference. Is that priest going to be there?
Yeah.
And they don't even know the priest. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
It's all this.
That's very well said, and I think this is such an important gathering. And last night, Kelly told me that we're going to have clergy and lay people together. I think that's absolutely crucial because we're going to work together to reestablish this trust. And I know one of the best examples that I have is when, again, I do some parent sacramental prep meetings in Chicago, and very often there'll be first reconciliation meeting. And I'll be talking to the children, but also to the parents, and inviting them, let this be an opportunity. If you haven't gone to confession, or if you've been away from the church for a number of years, and not in a way that is berating them, but saying, I know sometimes life just happens, and maybe you stop practicing, and now this is an opportunity for you to come back. I love when the pastor is there, and I know the pastor, I've worked with the pastor, and I can say, and when your children come up to Father Frank, you come up with them. Father Frank is such a wonderful pastor. He's here for you. He wants to minister to you. And then the priest has an opportunity to talk. And it's a way of telling people, trust us, okay? Trust us in this situation. So pastors and lay people, let's work together to make this happen and reestablish that trust. That's the only way it's going to happen. And we're not in competition. As the bishop said in the document, we're co-workers in the vineyard, and we'll work together on this. I saw a hand way back here.
Yeah. The parents that we work with, since so many of them aren't either they're not well catechized themselves, or they don't attend mass. I think for them, a lot of church teaching that holds authority, you can't rely on the fact that the authority is authoritative, right? But if you give them some context for where the teaching came from,
yes, mm-hmm.
it's a very different feeling. I've had conversations with parents who said, well, I'm still not sure I agree with that, but I used to think it was just arbitrary.
Yeah.
I used to think that it kind of came from nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
But now that you've told me where it's from, now I can pray with it, now I can think about it.
Excellent. And that's what good catechesis is. Good catechesis doesn't just say, here, know this. It opens it up for people. It helps them to understand why and where does this come from. I'm not unaware of the fact that out of the corner of my eye I saw a gentleman enter the room who might have some stature here. Bishop, welcome. Joe Paprocki.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Would you like to say a few words? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for pulling this group together. I had a wonderful dinner last night with Kelly and Derek, and they gave me the backstory on just the incredible amount of work that's happening in this diocese to not just begin a new way of doing initiation, but to approach lifelong faith formation. And that's the mindset that people are working with here. So thank you for your leadership, and thank you for coming to affirm this gathering as well. So I was given the signal that it's about time for me to step aside. I'm going to go 5 more minutes here, okay? And then we'll call Monica up to talk about Loyola Press resources. Let me move on and start talking about the next principle. This one is not always thought of, but some of you mentioned this before. Another institution that no longer supports faith formation, either implicitly or complicitly, however you want to say it, is the public school system. Now, I'm not going to bash the public school system. My daughter works for Chicago Public Schools. But public schools in our country once mirrored Christian values, albeit Protestant. One of the reasons that the Catholic school system was set up was because the Catholic immigrants who came to this country recognized that the public school system was a system for transmitting Protestant values and Protestant teaching. Okay, so we're Catholics, so we need to have our own system. That is no longer true of the public school system. It no longer mirrors or reinforces, again, implicitly or complicitly, the Christian values that we are teaching. And so you are often feeling at odds, at loggerheads, with the experience of the children and their families in public schools. Whereas in days gone by, those few children who were in the CCD program, because we wanted all the children to be in the Catholic school, but those few children who were in CCD and went to the public school, we could at least feel like they weren't in competition, that the public school wasn't making our job harder. Okay, do you see where I'm coming from on that? So your thoughts about that and what your experience is too, yes?
I agree with you that the public schools can be and are in conflict with some of our Catholic tradition and teachings, but I also think this whole image of packaging and repackaging, the public schools have kind of hijacked in a way some of our sense of mystery and health, with their talk of let's have mindfulness in the classroom.
Okay, yeah.
If we would ever dare say, are you teaching them to pray?
Right.
Not rote prayer, but it's opening yourself to that sense of quiet, that sense of coming into yourself.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about repackaging, my thought is how do we hijack it back?
Exactly.
And talking to them about, yes, when you pray the rosary, as you were saying, it's calming, it helps you get centered.
Right.
It takes you out of that stressful monkey mind.
Yeah, so it's a very good point. Another good example of that is service experiences. You know, public schools very often require service experience of their students. And so we have to stop and ask ourselves, so how is what we do different when we require people, students, whoever, to go through a service experience? In a public school, it's done to become a good citizen of this country. In our Catholic experience, it's done to encounter Jesus Christ. So how are we structuring our service in such a way that it facilitates an encounter with Christ? That means it's going to need to have reflection. It needs preparation. What are we about to do in preparation about the corporal and spiritual works of mercy? The experience itself, and then reflection. How did I encounter Christ in this experience? They're not going to get that in public school. They're going to do their service, but they're not going to reflect on where was Jesus in that. So we need to be very intentional about how is what we're doing different than what's being experienced in the public school when they have, yes, indeed, hijacked some of those things and are saying, oh, well, you can get that here. Yes?
Well, I think one of the great opportunities in a situation where you have public schools, let's use that example, who are requiring service of the students, if we can help the students to see that, yes, they're doing that service because they're asked to do it to become a better citizen, but in fact, if they're looking at that service as, I'm helping this person is Christ to me, you're beginning to bring that leaven back into society to a certain extent and make that connection between church and real life. Church isn't separate from real life.
Excellent.
Real life is faith. And you
Yes.
may be doing this kind of activity with the public school, but guess what? You're really doing something that's faith-based, and this is how. Help them to reflect on those kinds of experiences and make the link between church and school.
That's an excellent point. You know, as opposed to the dichotomy that I was taught as a kid, that I remember this. I'm not making this up. I remember one time one of my teachers put in on the board in the Catholic school a diagram of how do we get to heaven. And she had Catholics, and she had an arrow going straight up. And then she said Protestants, and the arrow went off to the side. It didn't go down, but it's, you know, it's like, so the other experience I had was as a kid one time changing the channels on the TV. This is how we used to change channels. Not clicking, but 2, 5, 7, 9. And I come across a man on TV who's talking about Jesus. He's talking to a whole stadium full of people about Jesus, and I've never seen this on TV before. So I asked my mom, I'm maybe 9 years old, I'm like, Mommy, who is this? She's in the kitchen washing dishes. She looks in. He's a Protestant, Joey, change the channel. Now, we laughed to keep from crying, I think, in a sense. There was we were being taught a dichotomy. Us good, them, suspicious. What you're saying is, how do we become a leaven? How do we connect what's happening in our environment and say, when you're in public school doing these things within yourself, you can be aware of the fact, you can take Jesus with you. You may not be able to publicly talk about it in your class, but Jesus is with you. And when you do that service or you do that mindfulness, and that becomes a leaven for us. I see 2 hands in the back. You're going to get the last words. Okay. We'll do 3 then. 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to hear from Monica. So, yes, sir, you go first.
I yield to the lady.
You yield to the lady, yes.
I have 2 points to make.
Yes.
On the service point, I think it's, teaching high school students, service is wonderful for them. They love service. But the big thing that we're missing, that I see it as a catechist, is that we don't bring to bear that great doctrine of Catholic social teaching that we have that kids really, really click into.
Wonderful.
So that is really important because it's all the issues that they're dealing with in public school that we have a beautiful Catholic framework that is
very good,
very well fleshed out that we should be using and making known to our kids
good.
And to our families.
Good.
The second point is, and this is another thing in public schools that we've had to deal with in Hanover, is the problem of gender identity in public schools and what that does to our kids who are coming to confirmation class.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, we have had to deal with some pretty important issues, and the kids feel really torn.
Mm-hmm.
Torn to the point of, I don't know that I can go to church anymore because this is what the church is teaching. Or, how can I say that to my friend?
Yeah.
You know, who comes from a family that's not like mine. You know?
These are challenges that did not exist back in the day, and so you're facing some really complex challenges. Make sure you don't go at those alone, you know this, that you always work in tandem with your diocesan leaders to know what's our policy, how do we handle these things, how do we articulate our teaching, because it's very complex and you can find yourself in way over your head if you try to handle that alone. The last two comments, and then Monica. Oh, you're going to yield to this lady. What a gentleman. Yes.
I'm just going to add that at the end of the day, we can give them the tools, we can give them the language to go out and encounter the world, but we need to also remember that we are their sanctuary.
Yes.
One of the things that I noticed when we were doing our Life Teen program this year, we had one activity where the kids had to talk about a time when they felt really challenged in their faith. And the kids all came forward, the ones that were in public school, about teachers that were just completely against everything the Catholic Church stood for and open about it and really just berating these kids on a regular basis without even knowing it, because I don't think the kids even knew how to come back. I mean, they're in a vulnerable situation. They're being told by authority that what they've been taught at home is not real. And so they come into the confirmation program really wanting to be with other kids who share their experience and connecting with them. And so embracing that, recognizing it, and giving them some affirmation.
Good.
And sometimes it was coming from their home. You know, sometimes they felt like they had been raised Catholic, now the home situation had changed, and they weren't even finding sanctuary in their own home. And so what was home? And so now I was trying to tell them, you are home. You're home right here.
That's an excellent point. And, you know, one of the reasons that we as Catholics are sometimes a few steps behind in getting used to this whole evangelization notion is back in the day, we didn't have to talk about our faith if you grew up in the bubble. You know, because everyone there thought the same way. No one questioned you. Why do you do this? Why do you do that? It's just we do it without question. And now we live in a world where people are going to say, well, why do you do this? So, for example, on my car ride from the airport with my Uber driver, nice guy, he asked, so what are you in town for? And I says, well, I work for a Catholic publisher in Chicago. I'm here for the Diocese of Manchester. It's having a faith formation gathering, leaders from all the different parishes talking about how do we reach families and so on. And he felt compelled to say, well, I disagree with a lot of what the Catholic Church says, but then we got just talking about families. But he felt compelled to tell me, you know, that if we had more time, I'm sure he would have brought up some of those issues. And I would have been forced to, you know, how do I respond? So that's something that's new in a sense that we didn't have to experience years ago. How do we engage in dialogue? Yes, sir, your turn finally.
I yield to the lady who's going to give us the...
Oh, okay. And I too will yield. I'm going to turn it over to...
So, point number 5. What has changed that once, long ago, created an ecology of institutions that supported faith formation, but now are gone. And this one, I think, again, is something that you mentioned, but the second part of it. The control of information coming into the home. So, you know, 50 years ago, if you wanted your family to be exposed to Catholic values, it was very easy for you to control the kind of information that was available in the home. And so you made sure that you, first of all, you brought the church bulletin home, any other periodicals from the literature rack, your copy of the diocesan newspaper, and a copy of Catholic Digest, a copy of Our Sunday Visitor, and you knew that the only information in your home was going to be controlled. Try controlling information today, right? That's gone. That is out the window. I was doing a presentation one time about using contemporary music in faith formation settings. I'm a big music person, and kids love music. You know, they're born with earbuds, you know, listening to music. And so I was doing this presentation, and one of the participants came up to me afterwards and said that she really objected to this. She says, I don't want my children, or I don't want any children exposed to this kind of music, to contemporary music. And the only way I could respond was saying, if you think they're not listening to it already, you're fooling yourself. Absolutely fooling yourself. You can pretend that you have some kind of control over that, but if your child has any kind of mobile device, they can have access to pretty much anything. And so shouldn't we get in on having a voice about what they're listening to? And again, being that leaven, how can we, you know, infuse gospel values into their listening of contemporary music? So the faith formation was once supported because of the information coming into the home. Now, you know, think of the realities of, you know, dropping a child off once a week for 1 hour of formation. And then when they're done with that, where that's going to be reinforced. Where and how will that be reinforced? And so certainly if they're on social media, on the internet, et cetera, it's not going to be reinforced. They're going to be hearing opposite values and opposite opinions and thoughts. So I use this example. I shared this with Kelly and Derek last night. We talked about a lot last night, didn't we? You know, covered a lot of ground. I use this as a good example. I've always wanted to learn Spanish. You know, today our church population is growing because of an influx of our Latino brothers and sisters. And I want to be able to meet that constituency. But I took 1 semester in college. And that was a long time ago. And so just recently I signed up for a 10-week course that the Archdiocese of Chicago was offering. And I wanted to learn this Spanish. And it started off very well. The first, 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, really jumped in with a lot of enthusiasm and, tried using phrases and words and so on. And then the 5th week of class, the instructor was ill. So the class was canceled. The 6th week of class, she was still ill, was canceled again. And the next week of class was last night, and I was flying, so I missed that. So long story short, I took this class once a week for several weeks, but nowhere else was it reinforced in my life. I didn't go home to where Spanish was being spoken. People said, well, you have to turn on the Spanish TV channels, which I did a couple of times. But in general, nothing in my life reinforced that. And so the Spanish didn't take. I know. But I use this as a metaphor now to understand, look what we're dealing with in faith formation, where 1 hour a week, they're being taught a new language, and then they go home to a place where that language is not being spoken per se, not being reinforced, and it's certainly not being reinforced by the social media and the culture in general that they are accessing through their social media. And so once again, it brings us back to what the model that we have been using
up until recently, still is coming from a time when that was enough. And I'll come back to that when we finish these 6, okay? Any other thoughts about the flow of information into people's homes and what that's doing for us? Yes?
In the same way that service projects in public schools can be a good thing, and we can use that to reflect on, we can't say that everything is bad in the culture that's out there.
Yes, thank you.
There are some reinforcements of our custom.
I appreciate those nuances. Sometimes in the course of my presentation, it can sound like, you know, all or nothing, or this or that. And it's good to constantly be reminded, you know, about, well, how can we maybe fuse those together and be that leaven that was mentioned earlier. Thank you. Good course correction. Yes?
My teenagers live off of apps.
Yeah.
I do myself now. At one of our family program sessions, the first one of the year, I asked all the families that were there who had a Catholic app on their phone.
Yeah.
And one grandma had the EWTN app.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So I gave them 5 minutes around their table to find a Catholic app.
Wow.
And download it.
Fantastic.
So they had to take the phone out.
Yeah.
Instead of put it away. And they all had a Catholic app.
What a great activity. I hope you're going to see a lot of people writing that down. You know, let them find apps and then you can give them more. Yeah. We have to show them where we are present in the new, as St. Pope John Paul II referred to it, the new Areopagus. Mm-hmm. St. Paul went to speak at the Areopagus to meet with that was the place where ideas were shared. And Pope John Paul II referred to social media and so on as the new Areopagus. You know, we have to be there like St. Paul and letting people know. So I love that idea of having them go on a search and then also, you know, providing them with handouts, you know, with here's links to other apps, or whenever you send an email out to the families in your programs and so on, to have a link to an app. You know, tell them to download the 3-minute retreat from Loyola Press. It's free, so I'm not asking you to buy something. It's a free resource because we're a Jesuit ministry. You know, we just need to make money to pay the bills, but we're not looking to charge for everything we do. So yeah, thank you. That's fantastic. What else? I saw another hand in the back here. Yes, in the front.
In line with that, there's so many great sources. Our parish has made available to everybody in the parish.
Good.
A subscription to Father Barron's youth program, so you can get access to all his videos.
Yeah.
And we also have made it possible for them to get formed so that they have not only adult faith formation, but there's kids stuff on there too, so that they can go and do that at home with their kids.
Yeah.
So,
you know, the phrase that Derek used last night, he says that we have to do some hand-holding. Yeah. And that's not to be condescending or patronizing or whatever the word is about our parents and families. They don't know. Many of them simply don't know. And so we have to do some of that hand-holding and show them how to do things, or, you know, how to find some of these opportunities. And you're going to share some of these ideas at your table in a little while. In fact, that's a perfect example, the one you gave. When we do the table talk, I want you to come up with what are other things we can or should be doing to meet all of this and to strategize. But I wanted to share an example that I had. This is a simple example. We talked about family rituals, family traditions, religious traditions, and so on. We can talk all we want about, you know, an Advent wreath in your home and, you know, palm weaving and stuff like that. And they'll look at us like we have 3 heads because no one has shown them how do you make or where do you buy an Advent wreath. So one parish that I was at, the parish where I worked as the DRE, we were blessed to have one of our catechists was our arts and crafts catechist. That's all she did every week was she came up with a craft that the kids would do to reinforce the lesson that they were learning. So on Palm Sunday, we employed her to lead a demonstration in the parish hall after Mass, coffee and donuts, and palm weaving, palm braiding. And she enlisted a bunch of teenagers to help, and she was up at the front, and she would explain how to do it, and then these teenagers went around from table to table to help people, and we showed people how you weave palms, how you braid palms, so they could go home and then every year thereafter hopefully remember, oh yeah, I remembered how to do that at St. Mary's. That's I think what Derek meant by the hand holding. We can't assume, oh, let's just say, go home and braid palms. They're like, what are you talking about? You know, what do you mean braid palms? Why would we do that? So it's not only the doing of it, but also the explanations of, you know, why do we do this? Why do we put palms behind the crucifix on our wall at home or behind a picture? You know, that this is it's what the people waved when they said, Hosanna to the King. So if you have a palm in your house, you're proclaiming Jesus as your King. It's that simple. That's catechesis. Tell them what this means, how to do it, and then try to build that tradition into their lives. Anything else about the flow of information into homes? We got some good comments about, let's realize it's not all bad, etc. Balance. Yes?
I know in our parish that a lot of times when we do like a prayer service for the children or do anything, I tend to make hard copies of it and have them bring it home because my feeling is the more spiritual or faith related things you can get to the home, the better it is. Because maybe one day a parent will forget the book.
Yeah.
And the first service will fall if the parent will happen to read it.
Yeah.
So no matter what we do, I try to send home hard copies. So we
Good.
can
That's wonderful. It can be hard copies, or you can find ways of sending this as a PDF attachment into an email blast. My parish has just within the past year, the pastor has caught on with sending email blasts, and he tries not to overdo it because people will write you off. It's like, oh, every 5 minutes I'm getting something. But he sent out an email blast for the Holy Week schedule. He sent out an email blast for whenever a parishioner passes away and there's going to be a funeral, sends out an email blast so everyone knows. And we've got to take advantage of this flow of information and make sure we're in the flow. It's no longer the question of should we have a Facebook page or should we have an Instagram account or should we have the question is what should it look like? All right, we shouldn't be debating this anymore. We need to have our presence in the new Areopagus. Otherwise, they'll continue to think that we're not relevant. Yes?
Our pastor does his announcements before Mass because he doesn't want to disrupt the prayerfulness at the end of Mass.
Yeah.
And he has on several occasions asked us to take our phones out. And he had us download hailmary.com or something like that. But it was so that he could send blast emails out to the whole parish.
Nice.
And also to sign up and to get formed because our parish provides that. And so he would actually, before Mass, have everyone take out their phones and give them time to do that. And I think that a lot of people use that opportunity. So at least they had that information, and that was parish-wide. Yeah,
that's a great idea. I've been at some parishes where, again, they'd ask you to take out your phone before you silence them. Take out your phone and check in. You know what it means to check in? You go on Facebook, and you say, I'm at St. Mary's Parish getting ready for the 10:15 Mass. Praise God. Put a little note on there. That's just a way of using social media to tell people this is a part of my life. I know some DREs or catechists who have their students do that. They'll say, okay, before we start class, take out your phone, tell them, I'm at religious education class at such and such parish. All right, send that out, put your phone away now, or silence it at least. To let people know this is a part of your life. This is something that is a priority in your life. And that's how we evangelize. people always think that evangelization has to be, you know, have you met Jesus? Are you saved? You know, Catholics are not, we're not going to do that, but we evangelize by proclaiming good news. I tell people, and I hope all of you do this today, that when you're done, share somehow that you had this amazing experience. Now, not just, you know, being here with me, but the diocese had this wonderful opportunity. I was together with 120 fellow pastoral ministers. We talked about how to serve our families better. Let's all pray for our families. Send that out on social media. Let people know this is what you are passionate about. And that's how we evangelize. Anything else? Yes?
I did not realize the impact of those weekly notes until I got involved doing RCIA this year. Okay. And every, like 2 days before every meeting, I would send out something no longer than 3 sentences. And when we got together for our last meeting last week, you know, I asked them what impacted you, and they love looking forward to a note every week, like, okay.
Yeah.
And they would respond to let me know if they were coming that week or if they were not coming. But I was amazed at how it built this little community.
Yeah.
And that they were looking for the notes.
Yeah.
I didn't realize the impact until I heard it back from them. And it was like, okay, I got to start doing this more areas in the parish.
Absolutely. There are many of us who are, who may be old school, who will still have the impression that, well, but those aren't real relationships, and that's not real communication. I'm sorry, but this is the reality of the generation we're serving. It's real. Those are real relationships, and that's not a virtual world anymore. It's the world. It's just the world. It is a newspaper to them. We used to hold up a newspaper, now they turn on a phone. It's the real world. And so we've got to get in that mindset. If you are not tech savvy, and many of us aren't, you know, we didn't, this is a great opportunity for you to gather together a small group of millennials. Say, you know, I need a little advisory group on social media. I'd like to get 5 or 6 millennials together, you know, to help me. Can you help me? Help us get on Instagram. Help us get on Twitter. Help us get on Facebook. How do we do this? What do we need? You know, that's a great opportunity because they'll come, oh, piece of cake. You know, they breathe this stuff. Okay? Anything else? Great conversation. All right, let's get to the last point, and then we'll get you talking to each other one more time. What has fallen away? The sanctity of Sunday. By that I mean the fact that back in the day, Sunday Mass or Sunday church going was all you did. You got put on. Don't walk in front of the speakers, Joe. You put on your Sunday best, you got in the car, you drove to church, and then you drove to Grandma's. Okay? And, you know, there was a pattern. Okay? I'm going to turn it off. Show that. Today, so back then, going to church had no competition. Little to no competition. That's gone. That's completely gone. I told you I grew up above my dad's drugstore. And I remember that our hours were Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 10 to 6. Wednesdays, 10 to noon, because then my dad, during the summer, he'd take off and we'd go swimming. So that's the only vacation we ever had. Closed Sundays, because everyone was closed Sundays. I remember that in about my high school years, my dad announced that he was opening on Sundays from 10 to 1 to try to get the mass crowd, you know, passing by our home to get to church, coming and going to to pick up, because he had 9 children, sending them all to Catholic schools, and he was racking up the bills, so he needed a little extra income. I have no doubt that he went to talk to the pastor about whether he could do that. He probably asked for a dispensation. Okay, that's, again, that's the mindset of those days. Today, all the stores are open on Sunday, and people work on Sundays. Many of you here work on Sundays, especially if you work for the church, right? And back then there was no sports on Sunday either. Well, that's all changed now too. So, tournaments and so on. Now, before I start sounding like a curmudgeon again, this is the reality that we're dealing with. It's not coming back. We're not gonna somehow have all stores closed and no sporting events on Sundays. It's not gonna happen. So, but we have to realize that the way we are doing faith formation was developed during a time when Sunday had no competition. So when we say, none of our families or hardly any of our families come to church, there's all kind of reasons why, and a lot of it has to do with just the competition that people have in their lives. It's no longer a day in which church was the one and only thing. So your thoughts about this, the competition that church going now faces? Any insights? Yes.
Also, back when I was growing up, that the family was more centralized, and time went on, people in the family became mobile, they moved away. So you didn't have that family gathering.
Yeah.
I was used to growing up, going to my grandmother. They didn't drive because they were immigrants, they didn't have a car. We went to one grandparent, the other grandparent, and then went home for dinner, as family. But as I'm the first one that moved out of state, so our families have become mobile from breaking away from families.
Yeah.
Young people are living somewhere else,
Mm-hmm.
farther away from their parents, farther away from their grandparents. So you don't have that family.
That ecology of institutions. Right. Yeah. It's like being in a greenhouse, we once had, and now it's gone. There's a very good book by a woman who passed away just a couple of years ago. Her name is Phyllis Tickle. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Phyllis Tickle. The book is called The Great Emergence. The Great Emergence. Not by Loyola Press, so don't ask Monica for it. Okay? Buy it, but don't ask her. She talks about, patterns that shift in our society like every 500 years. There's major pattern shifts. And she says we're going through one of those in the past 100 years. And she actually takes this idea of the sanctity of Sunday collapsing back to the invention of the car. She says, you think about what happened on Sundays before there were cars, you literally could go nowhere. And grandma usually lived across the street or in your same home or whatever. You'd go to church, come home, and there'd be the family dinner. And it was the job of mom and grandma to reinforce the church lesson that happened. Then the car came along, and families realized we can take a ride in the country. We can go to the movies. We can go to the mall. And so the role that mom and grandma once had of reinforcing the lesson over the Sunday meal was beginning to dwindle, even beginning in the 1920s when people decided to venture forth on Sundays. It was unheard of to not spend the whole day at home or the whole day at church, literally, because people didn't go anywhere else. It was the hub of everything. Beginning with the automobile right up, so this is not new, is what Phyllis is saying. That we can't say this is just recent. That it began to crumble when the lifestyle changed of living in the modern age, being able to be mobile and go somewhere. And so, a great point that you were sharing, and it really goes back to, the roots go back even further than we realize, but Sunday is no longer what it once was, and it's not going back. What else, Father?
Just a comment on sports. I mean, sports are here to stay, and the fervor, I mean, even in myself, if I confess to you, big Patriots fan. Anyway, and it's so interesting because missing Mass on Sunday and not going to church is no longer like a sin in people's minds. Or no,
right.
But if you kneel down now when the flag is being displayed at a sports event, that's a social sin. Or, you know, that gets more attention.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
My point is something of the fervor of the faith has been transferred now into sports in a lot of ways. And I'm wondering if there are ways we can get that fervor back. And, you know, maybe the team idea in sports, like everyone has a role to play. Like, what's a winning team?
Yeah.
You have an important part to play. You're all part of this team. We're a winning character. Not to be like overly competitive, but
the
sparkle to make us feel like we're shining.
Yeah.
The faith community. That's
I think
I don't think we should down sports because that's here to stay.
Right.
There's something in sports that's attractive to our people and our culture that maybe we ought to learn about.
One of the things, you're right on to something, Father. I'm glad you bring this up. I think one of the things that is so attractive to people about sports is the drama. We don't know how it's going to end. We watch the game, so how's it going to end? What we have to do in our worship is communicate the drama of the gospel story. The fervor you talked about, you asked the question, you know, how do we bring about the fervor? We should begin by asking, where is the fervor in our worship? Is there fervor in our singing? Is there fervor in our homilies? Is there fervor in the way we worship? Is the homily dramatic? In other words, is it touching on life issues? Okay, when I say life issues, I'm not talking about death penalty or abortion. I'm talking about life, my everyday life, which is dramatic. Well, I bet if we went around and everyone shows something dramatic going on in your life right now, oh my God, I think we'd all need a Valium by the time we're done. I mean, we've got a lot of you-know-what going on in our lives right now. One small example. So last week, my daughter-in-law, who just had the baby 3 months ago, her sister was due last week and gave birth to her baby on the same day that their aunt got hit by a car and was killed. 50-something years old. That's dramatic. Do we speak to that? Do we speak to the drama of life? In other words, do we speak to the tragedy? Do we speak to the hurt? Do we speak to the pain? Or do we just teach doctrines that are not connected? So where's the fervor? Where's the drama? That's the challenge we have. And that's what I wrote about in my book, A Church on the Move. Okay, so ask Monica how you can order that. I talk about how do we get that fervor? How do we get that drama, that excitement to everything we do, even in how we welcome people? I told Derek and Kelly last night, I said, you look at how does a realtor welcome people to an open house when they're selling a house? They put up signs, big signs, open house, arrows this way, balloons, right? You know when there's an open house. A block down, they put up a sign on the corner with balloons, open house, this way. Then you get in front of the house, big sign, balloons. What do we do when we host events? Derek said he went to a marriage prep place and he found where it was taking place behind this big rusty steel door with a piece of paper taped up and in crayon, engaged couples. Engaged couples. That's it. Where's the balloons? You know, where's the big signs? Welcome. You know, we're going to be walking with you on this journey of a lifetime instead of engaged couples. jump through this hoop. So, Father, thank you for bringing that up. All of us, let's ask ourselves, where's the fervor? Because if they're not seeing fervor, we don't stand a chance against sports. We don't stand a chance. Yes?
I want to add to what Father said. I thought that was great. I had the experience in our parish where I would have parents, instead of like going, oh, we're all going to go to Mass and we'll go to the donuts, or whatever it is. They said, listen, the coach said you miss a practice. You missed practice this morning because it's the cheapest ice time and you can't play.
Yeah.
Parents will, they bow to that.
Yeah.
And the kids bow. So the power is not the power of the Holy Spirit. And obedience has been disordered in a sense.
Yeah.
There's been more obedience to the power of a coach.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this is the mother of many athletes, okay? And I know about that, okay? I can remember my father-in-law dying on a Sunday morning, and very suddenly, very sadly, but our oldest son was the quarterback at St. Thomas, and he was going to play in the game, okay? Saturday morning. And we suddenly had to get on a plane and go, and I remember him saying to us, he's a lawyer now, good thing, he said, oh, I can't miss that game. I don't want me to. Remember my husband saying, really?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Really? Well, now, not that he didn't love his grandfather, but I'm saying the power
Yes.
of the coach
Yeah.
saying something. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And this is a good kid. He's a lawyer today, and I said to him all the time, he'd say, excuse me, have any of your kids ever made a game more important than going to your grandpa's funeral? It's sort of humor in our family. Kind of
Yeah.
thing. But it speaks to what you were saying, too.
Yeah. Thank you. Well said. Two people at this table. Let's start with you.
I don't agree with you on the sanctity of Sunday being
Okay.
gone. I think it's only gone if we let it be gone. And I think the whole thing with the coaches and whatever, if you could get enough people to speak to the issue, you can make a change. Our country was founded on those principles, and Christians are supposed to be different. You know, look at the Orthodox Jews. Those who live within an ekruv, they keep holy the Sabbath, and they simplify their lives on those days of the week. And they have very strong, united faith community, different than ours, but that's a very different faith experience for those children versus someone who doesn't grow up within a strictly Orthodox community. I think it's our fault and our sin that we've let go of the sanctity of the Sabbath. I don't care what day it's on, but there needs to be Sabbath time in people's lives.
I agree with you totally.
That's part of the reason we have all the problems we have culturally.
Oh,
I don't think we should give
when
up.
I talk about the sanctity of Sunday no longer existing, I lament that because we believe that it is a sacred day.
I think we should do something about it, not just...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's going to be your job in about 10 minutes. Okay? What are we going to do? How do we do that? Is it possible for us to get our communities to think the way that Orthodox community thinks or the way a Mennonite community thinks? Or so? Is that even possible? Is the toothpaste out of the tube now? You know, so these are the challenges. So, no, thank you for sharing that. Yes?
And I think the church is working with the change of the culture because I always say to my children and the children of the church, look at all the different masses you can go to now. I mean, you can go to 7:30, you can go to 9:30, the 11:30. We have a 6 o'clock on Sunday night. I mean, pick a mass. I mean, meet them where they are. Maybe not the whole Sunday, but it's an hour.
And if you're traveling because of a tournament, you take out your phone and look up the area parishes, and we need to tell people that they can do these things and encourage them to. Yes?
We don't kick them off the team either. Like that's an advantage we have. Even if they, but it is why they put it in class. But when I talk to kids and I'll say you're still part of this team.
Yeah.
This is important, but so we can play that out more.
We don't have the leverage.
We don't have
that leverage. Yeah.
We can play out that.
And that's not the leverage that we want to have either, the fear. Because that was You know, when I was growing up, that was the main reason to go to Mass, was because if I didn't, I'd go to hell. Okay, that was the tack that was taken. Now, theologically, we may still agree that that is a serious sin, but that strategy is not going to work. To tell people, well, if you miss, you're going to hell, they'll just say, oh, shut up. Right? I mean, they're not going to listen to that strategy. So yeah, that's why we're saying that. And again, let's not throw up our hands in any of this. Let's say, let's roll up our sleeves. So what are we going to do? What can we do? Yes?
I think one thing to do is to show that we're not about the fear, but to show some level of compromise and to be willing to not confront, but to address things as they arrive. I found that if I say directly to a parent, can you give me the phone number and name of the coach? Because maybe we can work something out.
Good.
I'd be willing to share missing half of my classes if they're willing to share half of missing practices.
Good. Be a go-between.
Let's find some way to compromise, not saying he can't be on the team, he's
Yeah.
got to choose this, it's so much more important, but just trying to make some level of compromise. Where I'm willing to talk. I'm not just going to be another pick or choose mom.
Let me offer another suggestion too that I think is effective. When I'm invited to do parent first communion meetings, which I've done for years, and finally I got so frustrated doing them because the parish would invite me to come in, and the schedule was basically they would get up and say a Hail Mary, then they'd introduce me, and I'm supposed to give the talk for an hour, and then there would be a glory be, and they go home. And I'd walk into it very often. It was done in church, and there was no welcome, no greeting. The people sat wherever they wanted, so they're spread out all over. And I'm in this big vacuous church giving the talk. I said, I'm not going to do that anymore. So first of all, you want me to come to a meeting? It's going to have to be in a setup like this. I said, figure it out, but people are going to have to be together. I said, I'll give a 20-minute talk. Then I want you to assemble a panel of 5 parents who went through their child's first communion last year. And here's a set of questions I want you to give them. I'm going to interview them. They're going to be a panel in front of the others. So they're going to give witness talks. And one of the questions is, what do you do to try to make Sunday a priority, Sunday Mass a priority? And when they hear it from their peers, they hear another parent, and I told them, I said, and please be honest. I said, I'm not asking you to sit up there because you're perfect. And so they'll often say, we do the best we can. Sometimes we have tournaments and things that come up. But, I figured out that, gosh, I can look that up, see where we're going, and look up, is there a Catholic church there nearby? Look up their schedule. So there's kind of like no excuse anymore. And so when we go on the road for these tournaments and so on, we try our best to get to Mass, because I want my kids to know that. It's very powerful when they hear fellow parents say that, as opposed they know you're going to say that. They know Father is going to say that. But to hear another parent say, we try to make this a priority. We're not perfect, but we want this to be important. I highly encourage that panel of parents. Yes, sir. We're not going to let you yield your time.
A friend of mine had a parish in New York, and his parish is located across the street from the ball field. So he got tired of seeing his parents make it over there, but not making it over to church. So he got 2 banners, one for baseball season and one for soccer season. He paid to put the banners on the fence, and it was score at St. Thomas More after the game, Mass at 5 o'clock. He only had to do that for 1 season, and what he found out, not only did he get his own parishioners, but he got the kids from the neighboring town, their families.
Interesting.
So it was.
There are creative ways of addressing this. Good. And positive ways.
Yeah.
Great positive way. Yes.
I think it's a good thing to, rather than give us, this is the answer, this is how you sanctify Sunday, come to Mass. There are other things grandma. Maybe that's the day that they reach out to family members who aren't there, or that they play a board game.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge, is to ask everyone to take that role of creator and create your Sunday and think about it intentionally, deliberately. Think about how Sunday is going to be different than every other day.
The Catechism actually tells us that the way we keep holy the Sabbath is by going to worship, Sunday Mass, resting from work, if at all possible, and performing corporal and spiritual works of mercy. That's actually supposed to be something that Sunday should be dedicated. So go visit grandma who's sick or lonely or who's alone. So that's interesting. Most of us don't know that's what the Catechism says should be done on Sunday. Not that that's the only day we do the works of mercy, but that's a special day. This day is set apart from the others to do the work that during the week we don't have time. We're working from 6 in the morning till 7 at night, and then coming home and trying to feed our families, and so to do a corporal work of mercy outside of the home, because raising your children is a corporal work of mercy. Something else we need to help the parents understand. Every day they're feeding the hungry under their own roof. Every day they're sheltering those who would be homeless if not for them. We've got to help them see that being a parent is performing corporal and spiritual works of mercy every single day. They shouldn't feel like, I never have time to do any of the spiritual stuff. You should tell them, yeah, because you're doing it under your roof every day for your children. Help them to find God in that experience. Find the language to realize that what they're doing is sacred, not somehow separate from what happens on Sunday. Yes?
This may seem simplistic, but I think it's essential. Scripture tells us that where your treasure is, there your heart will be, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the main areas of focus, which is certainly part of catechesis, is evangelization.
Yes.
And my experiences of over 40 years of being involved in family catechesis is that when you get them hooked on Jesus, all of a sudden, all these other things that have taken priority now move in priority.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to be mindful all the time. How do we evangelize?
Mm-hmm.
How do we ask them, do you know Jesus?
Yeah.
Do you know he wants a relationship with you?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know that your job is to bring your children to heaven? I think we just have to say it plain and simple and over again and use every opportunity.
Yeah.
And we have to give parents with their children the opportunity to experience mystery together.
Yeah.
So not just teach parents about Eucharist or
Right.
give them a lesson, but give them a lesson and then have the children come and have a half an hour of adoration together.
Yeah, an experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they walk out Pope John Paul, before he was Pope, in a note, in a footnote in one of the documents, says that they need a common language so that
Mm-hmm.
parents are not estranged from the faith language of their children.
Yeah, good.
So we need to be evangelizing the parents
Mm-hmm.
and then the children, but as a family unit as well.
Yeah.
And give them that common language, give them that common experience of mystery together.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't just become you have to do this,
Right.
or
And we have
we
to,
want to do this.
Yeah.
So the levels change. And
we
the
have to remember,
priorities change.
thank you, we have to remember that in catechesis, we are not teachers of a subject, we're facilitators of an encounter. So it's not, let me tell you about someone, it's, I'd like to introduce you to someone. There's a big difference between it. If I came in here and said, I know all about George Clooney. I can tell you all about the actor George Clooney. I know his whole life story. And me saying, George Clooney's here. I have him waiting right outside. Would you like to meet him? I think a lot of people would be like, shut up, Joe, bring him in. There's a huge difference between talking about someone and saying, I'd like you to meet. That's what we're doing. Are we inviting people to an encounter, saying, I'd like you to meet Jesus Christ? And not to assume they haven't met him, but I'd like that encounter to go deeper. I'd like to invite you to a deeper relationship with Jesus. All right, I'm going to limit it to 2 more comments. I see this hand and that hand, and then we are going to do our table talk. Yes?
Well, my question for us is, do we really explain to the people why Sunday is sacred? Do we really explain to them that the reason why we hold this day so special, and that through the resurrection, that's how our encounter with Christ begins?
That's the work of catechesis. Work of catechesis needs to explain to people why. We always talk about kids, we always say, why do I have to do this? Why? We're no different as adults. People want to know. We say, we need to go to Mass on Sunday. They're going to say, why? Why, Father? Why do I have to go? And we need to be able to have a response that is full of fervor and that is something that's convincing. So that's the work of catechesis. And we have to get better at that. So yes, last word. Yes, lots of pressure.
So one of the things I'm seeing, and I'm sure that many of you are too, is that with the restored order and the increased pressure to provide multiple different kinds of programs for families, I'm seeing an increase in frazzled mommy syndrome, where they come in the door and they say, how are you going to provide religious education as one-stop shopping for me? Because I can't be here 3 days a week for religious ed. And one of the things that I really want to say, and I'm not exactly sure how to say it, is to give the parents permission to allow themselves to create just the priority for the faith. And so many of them just want to exhale. They just want to be able to breathe and not feel like they're pulled in so many different directions. Maybe this is the year we get that back. Maybe this is the way that we advocate for our children, by pushing back at some of those coaches that say, your kid's here or he's not planned. We need to advocate for them, and we need the kids to know that it's okay to witness to their faith. Especially those confirmation kids. That's what it's all about. If we don't, then it gets worse. Then they just keep taking those times during Sunday. And we have to, at a certain point, we can be nice, we can phone the coaches, we can do all of the things that I'm here, and which are great ideas, but at a certain point, where is your priority? And when are you going to take time for yourself to not be frazzled mommy anymore?
Good. Well said. Thank you. You lived up to the pressure of that last word there. Let's do this now. Let me quickly go back and show you these 6. I'm going to ask you at your tables to brainstorm a list. You did one list before, let's do another list. What are some strategies? What are some things we can do to combat this? They may be things you're already doing in your parish. Some of you are inventing the responses to these very problems. Share that with the rest of your table, and then we're going to hear, shared with the whole room. So we said, how do we compete against all the competition we have on Sundays? We said we no longer have control of information. We said that we no longer have another school system that supports what we're doing. We said we no longer have an institution that is unquestioned in its authority. We no longer have families that know how to transmit devotions and popular piety. And we no longer live in communities that are completely homogeneous and insular. Given that, what do we do? What are some of the responses that we need? And be as specific as possible about any of these. But I'm going to give you 10 minutes on this as opposed to 5. But what are some of the ways we need to roll up our sleeves and respond? All right, 10 minutes. Change the world. Get to work. At your tables, you've come up with all kind of solutions to solving all the world's problems, or at least a few of them. So here's what we're going to do, as we did earlier today when you were outlining challenges. Right now, we're going to go around and ask each table to share 2 of the ideas that you came up with that are responses. We're going to start on this side. Yes, absolutely. 2 of the strategies that you have to respond to these current challenges. And we will once again ask that you tear out the page or whatever that you wrote these on and give them to Elise so that she can compile them. And Derek and Kelly said they can send the whole list out to you. So let's begin hearing from the last shall be first this time.
Okay, so we have a bunch of good contributions. One that I think is, I've seen it work powerfully, you touched on it, but to make ample use of witnessing, really empower witnesses who can speak to people from their own experience.
Okay. Okay. Nice and loud. Nice and loud.
Okay. I'll use my teacher voice.
Yes, please.
And another one was keep it simple with clear standards of success.
Good.
Don't complicate the message and don't give people something to fail at and feel bad about.
Excellent. Yeah, keep it simple. I believe that. Sometimes we make our Catholic faith out to be so complicated, people don't even know where to begin. And I understand there are complexities to our faith, but ultimately there is simplicity to it. And that's one of my favorite things that Pope Benedict once said. He was meeting with the pastors of his own diocese in Rome. And one of the pastors said, Holy Father, can you give us your wisdom in the area of catechesis? And his response was, we need to keep it simple. Now, you wouldn't expect Pope Benedict, a man of very complex, profound thinking, to say, we need to keep it simple. And so I think that's good advice for all of us. Yes, next table.
Well, we thought of strengthening the relationship between the parish church and the home, and how important that would be. You can do that with devotions and piety. A simple thing like encouraging your parishioners to have a crucifix in their home.
Yeah.
In a prominent place. In our parish, we're St. Joseph's Cathedral. We just are celebrating a year of St. Joseph. So focusing on your patron and making available statues of your patron saint so that they can take them home.
Yeah.
And this is just one. And this coming year, we're doing a year of the domestic church. And we're going to use the Holy Water Fund as a connection. So making Holy Water funds available so people can bring them to their home. We're always having bottles of holy water available for people to take home. So that's one. So strengthening that connection. But then liturgically in our churches, to make Sundays important, something special, not to make it contemporary, but to make it, as the documents say, the earthly liturgy, the foretaste of the heavenly liturgy. And so that it is heavenly, that we don't just throw it together.
Yeah.
That our ministers aren't just routinely reading or being casual with distributing Holy Communion or Holy Press. Music. I'm at the cathedral, so I'm spoiled. But people do come to the cathedral because of the music, the church itself, our servers. So we spend a lot of time on those things.
Wonderful.
Make it seem like you are leaving the world for something else.
Yes. Wonderful. That's fantastic. I love both points, but in the first point you talked about the importance of helping families to do simple things like have a crucifix in the home. It's not enough to just tell them to do that. You've got to help them figure out where do you buy it, or maybe you purchase a bunch of them and resell them. I mean, our folks need that kind of help. When I was growing up, there was a Catholic church goods store 3 blocks away. So everyone in the parish, if you needed something, you went over to the church goods store. How many neighborhoods have that nowadays? So we have to do that hand holding that Derek talked about again. Okay, next.
So looking at the things that have changed, number one, the homogenous nature, identifying that we're still out there, and And so meeting people outside of the church and where they are, and maybe they're not coming in for Sunday Mass, but they might gather for mimosas and morning prayer. Something that is non-threatening and not very deep and doesn't have a huge commitment.
Yeah.
But it's a way to bring the friendliness of the faith outside of our doors and people's lives. And the other one, for number 2, the family traditions, which is pretty much what Father Jason just said, making it so easy for that. So having at Epiphany, putting together a home blessing kit and explaining this is what it is, and here's some chalk that's blessed, and this is how you do it. And holy water is available, it's okay, but you don't have to go buy these things or find these things. And we have a shrine gift store near our parish. We're very fortunate, but their hours are not as convenient for families. So maybe having them come Christmas season and set up a little store after church so that you don't have to make an extra trip or go by Amazon.
Great ideas. Did I hear you right? The first one, mimosas and morning prayer. I just wanted to check my hearing aid, and be sure. But I love that idea. That's fantastic. I mean, it's like theology on tap, kind of an idea. Those are welcoming expressions to people. Our young people today, millennials in particular, they're looking for experiences. I'm amazed at how they take things that different generations did, but they're turning them into experiences. They want everything to be some kind of an experience, and I love that. I think it's a great idea. So, I mean, something like mimosas and morning prayer, instead of just saying Catholics should pray morning prayer, invite them to an experience. Mimosas and morning prayer, what's that? That sounds interesting. It's the kind of thing that could speak to them, and so that's great. Okay, next.
We came up with, basically, again, feeding back to Father's point back there, but assisting with learning a tradition by supplying the needed items in order to then for families to set up the tradition, modeling its use.
Good.
And the example that was given was a prayer table that someone in the parish did a beautiful embroidery, made up cloths for the children to take home, and they would set up a prayer table with this cloth, with a candle, and then they would receive prayer cards on a regular basis that they could use in conjunction with their prayer table. And that fed into working at home, family devotions and piety, because here the kids are doing this at home, and then we had meal prayer cubes pop up. We had the Advent wreath come up, palm reading, and the suggestion for adoration after Mass again.
Okay, good.
Something that's
great. Thank you.
not all the time.
Good examples. You guys, even this late in the day, the brain cells are really working. Thank you. All right, next.
We were talking about making sure that his cousins know within the community. So a number of different ways where the parish actually has a picnic in the park for the parishioners. Whether it's visiting in the community. Others go to school sporting events and activities that are going on to represent kind of the parish connection with youth. Sponsoring an athletic event where they had a banner that was put up for a road race. Or signs that are just distributed within a community so that they make people awareness of the presence.
Wonderful. Great.
There. And the other thing that we were talking about was the use of technology, because that's where people are at. And how do we reach out through, whether it be Facebook or, I think you had mentioned before, Snapchat or any of those others. The importance of making sure that within the parish that there's someone who monitors that. Making sure that things stay current, number one, but that things get posted on it.
I love what you said about keeping current. I asked our IT guy once, what advice would he give to parishes that are going to be trying to get into the technological world, websites and Facebook pages. He said, care and feeding. I said, what? He said, when you get a pet, the kids, I want a pet, I want a dog, I want a dog. The parents are always like, who's going to care and feed for it every day? He said, social media, there's got to be someone who's caring and feeding it. The worst thing you can do is have someone visit your webpage in June, and it still has your Lenten schedule on it. They won't visit again. They'll be like, that's a waste. No one's keeping it up. It's got to be cared for and fed. And then the first thing you said, too, I want to comment on is it's public relations. How do we connect with the community? I read a lot of marketing books. I'm not a marketer. I don't work in the marketing department, but I learn a lot from marketing specialists about how to proclaim the gospel, because there's a lot of wisdom. There are people who know how to make a message get out and know how to make it go viral. Don't we want our message to go viral? You know, so read up if you have an opportunity. If you're looking for something good to read, go to the PR, the marketing section, and find some books about, you know, how do you get a message out? How do you make, there's a good book. I'll recommend the first one right off the bat. The book is called Contagious. Contagious. Wish I could remember the author's name right now, but you'll find it. And the subtitle is How Things Go Viral. He has 6 points in his research. There are 6 reasons that a picture or a story goes viral on social media. And I think that's great advice for us to look at. How do we make the gospel go viral? We have to follow those examples. Okay, next.
We talked at our table about making those personal connections, really creating a culture of welcome so that people want to come back. We were talking about getting people through the doors and wanting to continue to come. So just some simple things. Some of the ideas were mentioned, but some other ones were just having greeters rather than inside, but just right outside maybe. So that whether they're youth greeters or even ministers of hospitality just outside the doors, welcoming people before they even enter the building. And another one, church shared that they're already doing, just taking pictures, putting them in the bulletins. We're doing that at our church, but they're putting them on the covers too of just not even events, but people. So it just creates that culture of community that people gravitate to or want to be a part of.
Thank you. Thank you. I love what you said about the greeting. You know, we underestimate that. You know, even Walmart has greeters. I mean, there's a reason they do this. Yeah, Contagious is by Jonah Berger, B-E-R-G-E-R. Jonah Berger. Thank you. So when my kids were little, my wife and I took them, we went to an African-American parish. Someone I was teaching in a lay ministry class said, Joe, you got to come to St. Albee. It's just a wonderful experience. So we got our kids, packed up the car, and we drove to this wonderful parish, St. Albee. And outside they had greeters. You know, welcome to St. Albee. Well, thank you, thank you. We walk in the door. The pastor sees us, and I know him. He's like, oh, Brother Joe. And he comes, gives me this big hug. I said, this is Joanne. Big hug. Our kids, big hugs. They're like... The deacon comes running, Deacon Bruce. Brother Joe. Big hug for Joanne and the kids. And by the time we got to our seats, we were hugged by about a half a dozen people. And one of my kids said, that never happens when we go to our own parish. Now, I'm not suggesting that we need to love bomb people like that. That's the effusiveness of the African American community, and it's very natural. In many of our Anglo cultures that we'd be a little taken aback, but the welcoming. You know, is it enough for us to just say, hi, good morning, welcome, welcome. Yeah, I was telling Kelly and Derek during our break over here, I said that, you know, being an introvert, the hardest time for me when I do a presentation is the 20 minutes before the presentation. When everyone's arriving and I'm supposed to stand up here and say, hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? Because I just want to crawl away. I'm just, you know, I have an anxiety about that. And it loosens up as the day goes on. But I tell myself, you got to do that. You got to stand up here. And so hopefully I greeted most of you, or many of you, as you were coming by with good morning, welcome, good morning, welcome. And inside I'm thinking, I'm dying. You know, so it's that simple as that. I didn't give you all hugs or tell me your life story, but, you know, a smile, a welcome, let people know. Let's go on.
All right, so we discussed a few points about how to encounter parents and families where they're at. And this first point I took from the Dutch conference I actually went to. And it was a youth minister who was sick of seeing the parents just drop off the kids at pre-formation classes and drive off and not come in, even if they were invited to come in. So he had the idea of getting a bunch of copies and going over to a window with the cars and bringing a copy with all the gospel message on the copy.
Oh, okay.
And chatting with them for like 30 seconds to a minute, little commercial.
Nice.
And go on to the next car, and he was able to reach a lot of parents that way.
That's neat.
And keep going out of his way to meet them in the parking lot.
Good.
Because they couldn't just take the steps to the church.
Yeah, great.
So that was a quote that we liked. Another thing is being present at events that families are at, like sporting events or dance recitals and things like that.
Good.
You're in the face of the church, so you're out there representing
Yeah.
the church.
Mm-hmm.
By being there, you're kind of, in a sense, being like the presence of Jesus.
Nice.
There. And kids will notice it, and families will notice it.
Yeah.
And if they're going to chat about random things while they're watching their kids, play t-ball, why not chat about church when you're there?
Yeah.
Go out and reach them. Don't necessarily have to bring them to the church.
Yeah, very good.
And another thing that just popped into my mind was our lead deacon at our parish used to do pizza and beer with mint stuff.
Okay.
But if the appetizer was pizza and beer, like you were saying, the mimosa thing,
Yeah.
people will come out.
Yeah, just very, very hospitable things. Great, thank you. On to the next table.
Well, ours wasn't about pizza and beer, it was about the new wine of the Holy Spirit. And we were really amazed when you started playing that song, You Shall Renew the Face of the Earth, because that's what we were talking about. We were talking about, first, one of our suggestions was a parish-wide novena to the Holy Spirit, to get everybody to pray for that outpouring of the Holy Spirit, and that to restore order really means putting the Holy Spirit back in charge.
Yeah,
Instead of we doing all these things.
Yeah,
you know?
that's a good point.
I think of St. Marie's Parish is always my model parish. Like, and their programs are so powerful, but why is that? It's because the parish is so anointed. It's like such an anointing of the Holy Spirit.
Wonderful.
So that was our main focus. And I was telling Joe at the break how God really brought that lesson home to me as a teacher. After I'd been teaching in Catholic school for 18 years, and then we began the Daughters of Mary after New Hampshire. I'd been teaching down in Connecticut. And I'd been teaching 7th and 8th grade in Norwich, Connecticut for a whole year, religion, math, and history. And after a year had gone by up in New Hampshire, those kids invited me back to their graduation. You know, and so I thought, well, I wonder what they're going to say. They were saying what each teacher, what was the most impression that was made on them. And, you know, religion and math and history for a whole year. So I wonder what they'll say. And he said, well, she taught us how to pray in tongues. And it wasn't even I, it was this priest who had come in, and I asked him to teach them, and he did, you know, and he said, okay, I'm going to pray Alleluia, 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 then I'll start praying in tongues, and he did that with 40 kids, like 7th and 8th graders, in 5 minutes, but that was what they remembered the most from the whole year.
Yeah.
And so it was a profound lesson to me, because a sister had said to me the year before, you know, what's wrong with our Catholic schools? You know, the kids are going all these years to school, and they're graduating as pagans. You know, But then God showed me that that's what the reason was, and this is what you've been saying the whole day, Joe, is we have to bring them to the experience of the Lord. Otherwise, nothing that we say is going to go in.
Thank you, sister. Fantastic. Well said. Yeah.
Well, to segue from Sister Mary Rose, we talked about more focus on the experience of faith and on the experience of relationship too, and that helps the parents and any of the people in the parish to own their faith, because they're not going to necessarily just accept it on authority. And if we can teach
doctrine all we want, but if we don't have the experience to back that up and the relationships to build it, it won't go anywhere.
Yeah, good.
And also, actually, a small strategy is someone said we need to maybe assert ourselves a little more with coaches and other people and just say, hey, we one of our members here said, can you not have practices on Tuesday? And the coach said, remind me in August when I'm doing the schedule.
Nice.
And because that's when they have faith formation. And
Yeah.
We as Catholics, we haven't often spoken up.
Yeah.
That for just little something simple as simple as that.
And that's exercising your prophetic ministry.
And yeah,
you know,
and
calling the world to transform to the gospel.
So,
very good. Excellent. Thank you. 2 more tables left. Oh, 3.
We actually had a lot, we reaffirmed many of the things that were mentioned in the large one. We love the check-in idea, check in and check out,
Yeah.
on the social media thing, the hearty welcome, the peer witnessing, all of that, those are excellent ideas. 2 of the things that we kind of settled in on, the first was that it kind of piggybacks a little bit on what you were saying about relationship, and the phrase that somebody said that parents long to belong.
Yeah.
That's a really, to me, is a really resounding message to take away, is that they long to belong. And so sometimes to make that happen, you want to bring them together in situations that are purely social, so that they can learn to belong, because we're talking about domestic church here today, from the title, but what we're talking about in domestic church is that's where you first learn to love.
Yeah.
And in that love, you learn to love God and see God. And I think that's the same in our parishes. When we bring people together and help them to connect with one another, we are, without even talking about dogma, we are bringing them together to learn to love. And in that, they learn, they become closer to one another, and they become closer to God. So that's starting with that lived experience of parishioners and helping them to see how their lived experience is sacred.
Good.
Is really important, because that's what's going to bring that connection to God to many of our families who are far less connected than everybody in this room.
Good.
And then lastly, one thing that we talked about in terms of connectedness and then moving forward, and one of the tools that needs to happen for any of us to do this, and this may we might have to say clergy here we should exclude, but many of us have voiced a challenge with clergy acknowledging and accepting the expertise of lay people with whom they work. And to recognize that we do have a voice, that it's not the church authority of Father knows best, as it was in the 50s, but that we all have something to add to that. And there are some clergy who are really good at embodying that, and there are others who really have a long way to go in that area.
Good.
And so that might be something that dioceses in general need to try to encourage and try to build up.
Good. Thank you for sharing that. All right, let's finish up with our last 2 tables here. Let's keep it to 2 points if you can.
Okay, we talked mainly about conversation and collaboration with the parents.
Good.
We're not, not so much teaching, although we would be teaching, evangelizing, and showing parents how to bring some of these things into the house, because they won't tell you that they don't know.
Right.
And you have to, that you have to kind of, encourage, facilitate
Good.
that kind of conversation. And then the whole idea of the Catholic story, where we grew up in these Catholic bubbles, some of these people don't know the Catholic story.
Yes.
They don't know. They don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And how do you convey that? And how do you collaborate with them? And how do you have them take advantage of times when they have these times? So after they pick up their kids from religious ed, or they're on their way home from Mass, what are they talking about? Are they talking about the next thing, or are they talking about what they heard in the homily, or what did you learn in class? And I think for those of us who were at John Roberto's presentation a few weeks ago, the whole social media is huge.
Yeah.
And to take advantage of things that we can take advantage of. It doesn't mean that we have to reinvent the wheel, but you can, piggyback on a theme that's going on in your church or a homily, and you can have things available on your website and little 5 and 10 minute resources that are out there.
Good.
You don't even have to create them. You just have to put the link there so that when they're standing waiting for their kids, they're on their phones. So how do you get them to be
Perfect.
on our
wavelength?
On our wavelength.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I want to go back to the first thing you said about knowing our story. I think that's so important, and we need to encourage people to be able to, we talk about keeping it simple. I have a new book coming out at the end of the summer. It's going to be called Living the Sacraments. And actually, if you go on the Loyola Press website, you can pre-order it. But in that book, I talk about understanding our story can be summed up in what I call the 3 R's. The 3 R's. R's is a story of rescue, restoration, and reassurance. It's what the whole Bible story is all about, from beginning to end. Rescue, restoration, and reassurance. We are rescued through the intervention of the incarnation, Christ becoming one of us, the Word become flesh, dying on the cross to rescue us from sin, which we have no power over. We need help. We need a divine intervention. So rescue, restoration, being brought back. You look at all the stories in the Exodus story, the Exile story, the Christian story is all about being restored to our original relationship with God. And then finally, reassurance. How often does Scripture tell us, be not afraid, be not afraid. I'm with you till the end of time. That's our story. And if we can teach people to know those 3 R's, they can go around and explain the story. Ours is one of rescue, restoration, and reassurance. So, living the sacraments, keep an eye out for it. Finally, last table.
Boy, well, we had a lot of different things, and I think trying to summarize, there are a couple of things that come to mind. One is be more invitational or more intentional when people are coming to those big events where, a milestone like a baptism, a marriage, a funeral, etc., or Easter and Christmas, those things where we have like captive audiences, and to create programs that welcome people of all faiths, be invitational that way. Maybe after these, I know that every Christmas at Immaculate, we give a gift to all the families that show up.
Nice.
So we send everybody with something. And then also create a forum to encourage families to get together where they can meet each other, but also they can meet us and we can meet them. At our church, we do that through the family home study program, where we have brought like people from the community, from their church community, like the pastor, the Knights of Columbus, the Prayer Shawl Ministry, where the families have a very informal environment to come and meet them and see that, that there are common grounds. That they're just people like you, they just are wanting to help you with your faith.
Good.
So,
Thank you.
And prayer line, that calls, they can come and pray with us.
Okay.
So anyway. That's
wonderful. The eloquence in this room is incredible. I really thank you for these lists. I can't wait to read the whole thing. In fact, Derek, when you compile that, would you please remember to include me on that list? I'll put a post on my blog about this is what the pastoral ministers in the Diocese of Manchester came up with, and let the whole world know that, because people from all over the world read my blog. So this is phenomenal work that you did. Thank you for sharing that. Let me finish up with a few things. Why do I have a picture of the Baltimore Catechism up there? Because at one time, that's all we needed. When we lived in a Catholic bubble, all we needed was the answers, the questions and answers, the answers to a few questions. And, I have run into people who have said, I grew up on the Baltimore Catechism and it worked just fine for me, and the problem is that we got away from that, and now we have all of this crap, and we need to go back to the Baltimore Catechism. And what I need to tell them is you need to sit down for my 5-hour workshop that I just gave you folks here. Why that won't work anymore. That's not to say this is still not a nice resource to use, but it is not the solution. It is a resource that worked across the board in an age when the community formed people. And all the religious ed had to do was give a little doctrine. And now the community and the family are no longer forming people. So that's not enough. Okay, so the bubble has burst. It's gone. There's no going back. Now, so Einstein said we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. So you have just used new thinking. Through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, you just came up with new thinking. What are some of the new things we have to do? I want to share with you a few closing points here that deal with a few Loyola Press resources that I think can help you. One is we have a new resource that we worked together with NCCL, National Conference for Catechetical Leadership. It's a 6-book series called The Effective Catechetical Leader. And it covers the whole gamut of lifelong faith formation, this whole idea. But book 5 by Tom Quinlan, who is a friend of mine in the Diocese of Joliet, right next to Chicago, says faith formation ministry needs to be not so much about catechizing children as about evangelizing households. And I think that's one of the most powerful quotes in that whole 6-book series. I think, and this is, I think, where your bishop, your staff, and all of you are heading. You're saying we can no longer just be about catechizing children, we have to be about evangelizing households. So one of the resources, and we said this is what Pope Francis is telling us, we need to call fathers and mothers to return from their exile, reassume their educative role. So one of the resources that Monica shared with you, and I'm just going to go over it again. We made her rush, and I thank you for being so considerate because people, were ready to eat, and you did such a nice job of getting it out there and then saying, step aside, go eat. Let me go over a couple more things with the family catechesis, and then you can get in touch with Monica or your representative, Annie Lauer, and her information is in your folder. Annie's a good friend of mine. I've worked with her for 8 years. Her cube is right near mine, and we talk all the time, and she's very, very dedicated, and she's a real strategizer. She wants to sit down and figure out, okay, what's next? What do you need next? So don't hesitate to get in touch with Annie. So family catechesis, as Monica mentioned, the model is for families to gather once a month in the parish, 7 times a year, for a presentation that begins intergenerationally, so everyone's together. But then the children are sent off to be taught the first chapter of the unit by parish catechists. So you still have parish catechists, but they're only going to teach once a month instead of every week. The parents stay and participate in an adult faith presentation, all of which I have personally written. So all of the PowerPoints, so once a month there's a PowerPoint presentation on a variety of themes. I'll show you those again. I've written all of those, and they're written to take place 7 a year over a 4-year cycle. So you won't come close to repeating yourself until the 5th year. By the 5th year, hardly anyone's going to remember what you said 5 years ago. But since this is digitally created, we will have the opportunity to update it so it won't even look like the one that you did. So, but then the parents are equipped to teach the remaining lessons of that unit at home with their children, teaching their children at home. So you see, it's a cooperation between the parish and families. It's not just telling families, all right, do this on your own. Because they'd be like, we don't know how. Yeah, help us. So this whole program is designed to say, we're going to feed you adults so that you in turn can go home and feed your children. Okay. So the adult presentation, as I mentioned, focus around these slide presentations, PowerPoint presentations, very engaging, very visual. Most of the slides have very few words on them. Most of the words are in your script, and that script comes in a leader guide. And so you have an entire script that you can read the script, or you can, some of you will be able to look at it and just do it yourself. You know what you want to say about these, but the whole script is there for you to use. As Monica said, the session begins together. We pray together. We usually do some kind of activity with the parents and their children to introduce the theme, and then the children are sent off, and the parents remain for the rest of their presentation. This is a picture of a page of the leader guide. So once again, you look at the slide, and it's very visual. It has a title, but here's all the verbiage is in your mouth. So this is an activity to introduce the theme on this particular page. So that's what the leader guide looks like. As you can see, it's very user-friendly. It's not giving you, a script that just goes on and on and on and on. It's very user-friendly for you to engage people with. At home, as I mentioned then, the parents teach their children using the student book from either the Finding God or the Christ Our Life program. So the only hard copy that parents are going to be using is the child's student book. You're not buying catechist guides for the parents. They would really freak out if you had, here's a catechist guide, teach your children. What they're going to use is a digital at-home guide, which simply, and I think I have a slide on it, this is the entire lesson on 2 pages. It takes the parents through the entire chapter in a 2-page spread, simply gives them advice on how to walk through. Here's what's happening on this page. Here's the ideas being taught on this page. Here are some of the questions you can ask. So it's just kind of, to guide them through the chapter as they sit down with their child and do the lesson with them. So this is what I already, I was wondering how come I'm saying this again. At the end of each chapter, the children complete an online review, an online assessment, the results of which are emailed to the catechetical leader. So this is how you keep tabs. Are they learning? Are these lessons being done at home? The DRE at St. Andrew, where we piloted this, he said the beauty of this is if he wasn't getting assessments from a family, he knew it was time to call them. And that's why he said he used to spend the majority of his time on the phone calling for substitutes, catechists, substitute catechists. He said now he spends about the equal amount of time calling up parents to ask them, how's it going forming your child in faith? He said he feels like now he's evangelizing. So I haven't gotten an assessment from you for 3 weeks. Everything okay? Oh, we were on vacation. Oh, okay. Well, maybe you have a chance to catch up on a few of those lessons. Or if the parent says, oh, we're just not doing it, then the DRE has a chance to say, okay, well, let's talk about this. This is an important task, an important responsibility. So your job becomes more of assisting the parents in bringing their children up in the faith as opposed to just running a program and making sure that you have all the pieces in place. So those online assessments are critical. What questions do you have? We have just a couple of minutes left before we wrap up. You can request a sample of some of these resources. Most of them you'll be sampling online because they're digital resources. I think, let me tell you 2 quick anecdotes about the parish where they did this. First of all, it was a parish of about 100 children in the religious ed program, so that's the size that we're talking about. The pastor and the DRE agreed that they wanted to change the entire program from the traditional to this new family model. They were making a wholesale switch. They took an entire year to prepare the families. I think that's critical. You can't just spring this on people. They took an entire year to prepare the parents for there's going to be some changes. We're going to be moving in the direction of family catechesis. And the DRE said that his biggest theme in speaking to the parents was, you can do this. Because their immediate reaction is, we don't know how to teach the faith. We're not teachers. And he said that his whole approach was, but you are teachers. You're teaching your children every day what's right from wrong. You taught your child how to walk, how to talk, how to tie their shoes. You teach them how to look both ways before they cross the street. You teach them all the time. And now teaching them the Catholic faith and is a little bit more complex, but we're going to be here to help you. And you're going to have some great resources. You're going to have a great student book. You're going to have this great guide online. And if you need help, you can call me, the DRE, or you can call that catechist who's teaching your child once a month. So what we've done is, instead of the how does that go, the cart before the horse? We're flipping it back around and saying, instead of saying, we're teaching your children and we want you parents to be involved, we're now saying, you teach your children and we will be here to assist you. And so that's the philosophy he took. The fact that he took an entire year to prepare them, he said he had about 30% who were like, oh, this sounds great. You always have that group who are like, oh, good, more time with my child. He said about 40% in the middle who are like, if you say so. If this is what we have to do, okay. And then about 30% who were kind of like, meh, because he said that's how they were about everything. Even the old program, not that interested, not that excited. They were prepared to lose a good chunk of people because of the new format, but they were so careful in preparing people, and in fact, in that previous year before they started, they did a 2-month pilot. So during the course of their traditional year, they told the parents in February and March, we're going to try it the way we hope to do it next year. And they piloted this for 2 months, and I was able to go there and see it in action and get the feedback and give feedback. And then they did a survey monkey with all the parents about the experience of those 2 months. So very painstaking hand-holding, as Derek said, to make sure, all right, you can do this. We're here to help you. He said that in the end, they ended up increasing by 10%. I think because they did such a good job, they told the parents, and if you don't like this, here's the information of all the neighboring parishes. Call them and register your child there because we don't want you to walk away from the church. They did such a good job of getting the PR out there that I think the people in other parishes said, ooh, that sounds interesting. And they ended up gaining 10%. Now, I'm not guaranteeing that's going to happen everywhere. I also know that this model is not necessarily a panacea for every parish. But in a time when we're searching for new models, I think it is a very effective model to look at. And I would encourage you to look more closely at it. So do you have any questions about what our approach at Loyola Press?
I have a question. On the PowerPoint presentation, is there a way to get those home to the parents? Say, Sunday morning they wake up, the kids have the flu, they miss that section. Is that something that I have the PowerPoint on my computer and I show it?
That's a good question. I would think that there's a way to get that because it's digitally delivered to you.
Okay.
So I would think once you have it, you'd be able to share that with anyone else. Ask Annie, okay? So give Annie a call or an email and say, Joe talked about this whole thing. Can I do this?
Okay.
Send her an email and ask her that. Get confirmation. My gut is you should be able to because you're going to have it digitally. Okay? Yes?
Is it available in other languages?
It's in Spanish as well. Okay, so yes, it is available in Spanish. And as I mentioned, it is a 4-year cycle. So year one just was released this past year. Year two is ready for the upcoming year. You know, so wherever you're at, you obviously need to start with year one. So years 1 and 2 are ready. I'm writing years 3 and 4. I'll probably be working on that on the plane ride home. You know, so this is we're in motion. We're creating this on the go because that's where we're at today. Is we have to have quick response. Can't wait 10 years for a new product to come out. It's like, let's create this, get it out there digitally, and then change it and tweak it as we go. What else? Yes.
So one of the things that we've been struggling with at our parish is bringing the Catholic school, homeschool, and public school
Yes.
together
Mm-hmm.
to build parish.
Yeah.
Because the idea is, I guess, 10 years from now, we like to have one, and we want to make sure that
Yeah.
they're all, they know each other, and they're. And I guess my fear with. Well, I don't really know how does this, because with where we are with the restored order, we have a bunch of parents now saying, well, we were only signing up for the sacrament prep years anyway, because they get everything they need in their homeschooling and in their Catholic school. And so after we're done,
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't know how does this speak to that problem?
Mm-hmm.
How does this play out, and how have you guys seen it play out in your parishes to bring those people together so that we're not only getting the public school kids in PCD programs after this year?
I know the parish, Andrew, Father Sergio is the pastor, and he said that was his biggest concern was, what about the school parents? He says, now we're doing this wonderful thing for the RE parents and their families. And so their goal this past year was to bridge that. And I'm having lunch with David next week, Monday, to find out what happened this year. I'm going to ask him that very question. But they said their thing they wanted to do was reach out to the school parents and make these presentations available to them to know that they're welcome to be a part of this as well. That's something that I'm going to continue to look into and see, because that's one of those bridges that we have yet to gap. So that's a crucial question. We're just about out of time. If you have more questions, you can, let's take one more.
Can I just say something? Because we've been doing family homestay for several years now. Given the fact that we are going to this optional for religious education, right, because we're moving the sacrament piece from it, and that's the way the parents are going to look at it, I think we really need to be careful with online assessments and things like that, because this should be something enjoyable, and if the parents or the children see that as a test, I think that could be problematic. The other thing, too, that I would consider is really think about, do you want to split up the parents and the children? Because if you do that, then isn't it just classroom model and then adding a classroom for the parents? And can it be done where you're teaching a 2nd grader and a 6th grader in the same class? Yes, it can be done. It takes a tremendous amount of juggling, but it can be done. But I think those are two things that, if you're looking to implement a family program like that, to consider, especially given the environment of the way we're restructuring our sacramental.
I think what I would say as far as the assessments go is before the child finishes an assessment, there's a review game that's online and digital that the parents can spend time with the child so that it's fun, it's engaging, it's not going to feel like, oh, I have to pass a test in order to finish this. So that's something I think that would be a lot of fun for parents to sit down. You take it's a quiz basically, but it's done in such a way that if you don't get the answer right, it says try again. If you get it right, it's like bing, bing, bing. Just that kind of reinforcement. The other thing I was going to mention, this is slightly related to what you were just saying, but one of the biggest questions people have is, what about parents who have multiple children in different grades? And so I asked David about this. So how are you working that out if a parent says, I've got 4 kids, one in 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. Do I have to sit down with a half hour, with each of those kids? And he says, this is my response. It may not be something you'll be able to take out on the road with you, but I am bringing it out. He says, I tell those parents, you can't do this wrong. If you figure out a way to spend some time with your children, whether it's you take the first grader, your husband takes the second grader, or grandma takes one of them, or what about bringing in the godparents? We talk about godparents and sponsors never having a role in the faith formation of those children. What about asking them to step up and to help out with that? What about having one of the older children do his or her lesson on their own because you trust them, and then have them teach one of the younger children? He said, I have to trust the parents that they will figure this out. And someone said before, and we've got to trust parents to figure this out, and we help them. We're going to hit some snags along the way, and I want to hear from you. So you can contact me, you can contact Annie. If this is something you look into and you have some doubts and you say, but what about this, what about that? We need to hear from you, because we want this to develop into something that people feel is very helpful and very useful. So my email is simply my last name, Paprocki, @loyolapress.com. Okay, Annie's, same thing, lauer@loyolapress.com. So feel free to get in touch with any of us. I can't thank you enough for an extraordinary day. This has really been something. We've covered so much ground. I joke a lot of times about, well, we solved all the world's problems, but I really feel like we have made a great attempt here today at coming up with some very practical suggestions for how do we adapt to the challenges we're facing. So I can't thank you enough for that. It was a long day, but you worked very hard. Can't thank enough your staff and your bishop for the wonderful work that they're doing in walking you through this great shift. And people are going to be watching all over the country. We're going to be watching. I'm going to be telling people, keep your eye on Manchester. Okay? They're doing some incredibly new things there. Okay? So now the pressure's on. You got to do it right, huh?